Welcome back to Ancient Secrets. Sit back, relax, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from down below. It's amazing seeing people all around the world supporting my small channel. Now enjoy the show. In the hushed stillness of an Egyptian night, a lone figure stands in the desert where giants once rose from sand and stone. The air is warm and the silence is vast. Overhead the sky blooms with stars, and against that infinite dark canvas, a few colossal silhouettes break the horizon. These are the pyramids, ancient, enigmatic, their broad shoulders of limestone catching the faint silver of moonlight. They tower above the dunes like guardians in a realm of emptiness. All around them the desert stretches boundless and bare. Once, more of these giants might have ruled this landscape, monuments to the pharaoh's glory. Now only a handful remain to keep vigil, and in the emptiness between them linger countless questions. Why here, and only here? Why so few when ancient Egypt's civilization spanned millennia? Standing there in the midnight desert, one cannot help but wonder, why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids? Why did the age of these monumental tombs rise so dramatically and then end, leaving later centuries in the shadow of these immense memories? To seek the answers, we must journey back in time to the dawn of the Pyramid Age and beyond. As grains of sand slip through the fingers of history, we follow them to an epoch of pharaohs and sun gods, of engineers and labourers, of prosperity and ruin. We step into the golden light of 5,000 years past to witness how and why these giants were born, and why eventually the desert grew quiet of their footsteps. More than 1,000 years before Cleopatra's time, before the Valley of the Kings or the great temples of Luxor, Egypt's rulers poured their will and wealth into pyramids. We find ourselves now around 2630 BC, in the third dynasty of the Old Kingdom. Egypt is unified and flourishing under a powerful central government. The pharaoh is not just a king, he is considered a living god on earth, the mediator between his people and the divine. The Nile River's yearly floods have been generous, turning the fields into emerald green and filling granaries with grain. With food surplus and the country at peace, the stage is set for an audacious leap in architecture and spiritual ambition. It begins with Pharaoh Djoser. Until Djoser's reign, around the dawn of the Old Kingdom, kings were laid to rest in mastabas, low rectangular tombs of mud brick or stone, impressive in their own way but humble compared to what came next. Djoser dared to dream bigger. He commissioned something the world had never seen, a tomb that would rise toward the sky. His architect, the legendary Imhotep, envisioned stacking one mastaba atop another, each level slightly smaller, creating a giant stone stairway to the heavens. At Saqqara, on the west bank of the Nile, what started as a flat, square tomb grew layer by layer into a towering structure of 6 steps. As each layer was added, onlookers must have gazed in wonder and perhaps a little fear as the structure climbed above the desert plain. When it was finished, the step pyramid of Djoser soared roughly 200 feet high, gleaming white in the sun, a stairway for the king's soul to ascend to the imperishable stars. This was history's first pyramid, a shape that echoed the rays of the sun and the primeval mound of creation from Egyptian myth. It was a revolution in engineering, the first time a monumental structure was built entirely of cut stone. Beneath it lay a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers stocked with offerings, and a sarcophagus for the king, meant to secure Djoser's comfort and power in eternity. The step pyramid announced to the world that Egypt's pharaohs had both the divine mandate and the earthly might to marshal vast resources for a single, breathtaking purpose. It was a statement in limestone of Egypt's newfound confidence and the pharaoh's transcendent status. Diosa's people must have believed that as this pyramid stood firm, so would Ma'at, the divine order of the world. Djoser's pioneering monument lit the spark, and in the generations that followed, that spark became a blazing flame of pyramid building. The Fourth Dynasty, circa 2600 to 2500 BC, marked the zenith of Egypt's Pyramid Age, a time of almost superhuman feats of construction. Pharaoh Sneferu, who founded that dynasty, was a king with boundless drive. He ordered not one, but at least 3 pyramids during his reign. At Maidum, he began a pyramid that later partially collapsed, a sign that even the gods of engineering demanded trial and error from mortals. Undeterred, Sneferu moved north to Dahshur and built the bent pyramid, so named because its upper half angles inward, a change in design likely made when the builders noticed structural stress. As if learning from a rehearsal, Sneferu then oversaw the construction of the Red Pyramid nearby with perfectly smooth flat sides. This was the first true gleaming pyramid, no steps visible, just a seamless ascent to the sky. When Sneferu died, Egypt had proven it could erect mountains of stone at will. In fact, Sneferu's projects used more stone and covered more volume overall than even his successors' pyramids. He was a one-man pyramid boom. But even Sneferu's achievements were eclipsed by his son Khufu, who took royal ambition to its ultimate extreme. On the Giza Plateau, overlooking the Nile, Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid, a tomb of unprecedented scale, truly fit for a god-king. For roughly 2 decades, an army of workers, engineers, and artisans toiled to raise this colossal monument. It rose to a height of about 481 feet, 147 meters when finished, the tallest structure made by human hands in the world for nearly 4,000 years. Some 2.3 million limestone and granite blocks, weighing on average 2.5 tons each, with some as heavy as 15 tons, were quarried, transported, and set into place with astonishing precision. The pyramid's sides were aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, and its base formed a near-perfect square, each side about 230 meters long, an enormous footprint equal to about 8 or 9 football fields in area. When its outer casing of fine white limestone was intact, the Great Pyramid would have shone brilliantly under the Egyptian sun, visible for dozens of miles, a man-made mountain radiating light. Khufu's Great Pyramid was more than a tomb. It was theology made tangible, a resurrection machine in stone. Deep inside, hidden chambers and passageways were designed to ensure the king's safe passage to the afterlife. The very shape of the pyramid, broad at the base and tapering to a point, symbolized the sun's rays descending to earth, or the Benben, the primordial hill that first emerged from the waters of chaos in Egyptian creation myths. By climbing those rays or that hill symbolically, the deceased pharaoh's soul would ascend to join the gods among the stars. In essence, Khufu's monument was a guarantee of his eternal life and a bold claim to divine status. The pyramid's capstone, the pyramidion, possibly gilded, would have caught the first light of dawn and the last light of dusk, linking the king forever with Ra, the sun god. This was immortality by design. Khufu's successors, Khafra and Menkaura, built their own pyramids at Giza, each slightly smaller than its predecessor but still awe-inspiring by any later standard. Khafra's pyramid, which today stands 136 meters tall, sits on higher ground and retains a limestone cap at its apex, so it often appears taller than Khufu's. At its foot, Khafra likely commissioned the Great Sphinx, the colossal guardian statue with a lion's body and the face of a king, carved directly out of the bedrock. Menkaur's pyramid was the smallest of the three giants, originally about 65 metres high, but it had an elegant touch. The bottom courses of its casing were sheathed in rosy red granite from Aswan, a costly and difficult stone to quarry and transport. During this golden age of the Old Kingdom, Egypt's centralised government could muster resources on a scale that boggles the modern mind. The state mobilised tens of thousands of workers, some seasonally, farmers conscripted during the Nile's flood when fields lay under water and idle, and others full-time, skilled masons, sledges men, carpenters, and priests. Royal storehouses opened to provide abundant rations, grain to bake bread, cattle and fish for protein, and beer, the staple drink, by the gallon to fuel the labourers' energies. Bureaucrats organised deliveries of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries across the river, and granite from hundreds of miles to the south in Aswan. These heavy materials were ferried on the Nile when the floodwaters were high, then hauled overland along carefully prepared causeways and ramps. Engineering innovations flourished. Massive straight or spiral ramps of mud brick and rubble were built to drag stones higher and higher as the pyramid rose. Levers and rollers were likely used to fine-tune the placement of multi-ton blocks. Water-filled trenches served as levellers to ensure each base stone was set perfectly horizontal. Mathematics and astronomy guided the layout. Priests' astronomers observed the circumpolar stars to align the pyramid's sides to true north within a tiny fraction of a degree. Logistics, architecture, religion, and sheer human determination all merged in the act of pyramid construction. We can almost hear the clamour on the Giza plateau during those years. The scrape of copper chisels on hard stone blocks, the grunt and chant of teams hauling sledges up a ramp in unison, perhaps shouting, "Yo, heave ho!" in ancient Egyptian, the shouted commands of overseers keeping the timing and spacing, the occasional crack of a whip or the rumble of a massive block settling into its slot with a thud. Dust swirls in the hot sunlight, the scent of sweat and pulverized rock hangs in the air. The king himself might watch from a shaded pavilion as his monument ascends toward the sky week by week. This is a national project, immense at all times and even festive at times. Archaeologists have found evidence of grand feasts at the workers' village, heaps of animal bones, bread mould remains, beer jars by the thousands. One can imagine on certain feast days, perhaps when a milestone was reached, like completing a pyramid level, the workforce was treated to roast cattle, fresh bread and extra beer rations, fueling a night of celebration under the stars. The labourers toil not just for sustenance, but out of a deeply ingrained reverence for their divine ruler and the cosmic importance of their task. To build the pharaoh's eternal house is to ensure the god's favour on the entire land. At sunset, when the day's hauling ceases and a cool dusk breeze blows off the river, the workers might gaze up at the growing pyramid with pride. By the glow of campfires they could sing songs of the pharaoh's glory, or recount myths of creation, knowing that in raising this edifice they are participating in the eternal story of their people. In truth, to build a pyramid was to be part of something far greater than oneself. Looking at the Giza pyramids as the Fourth Dynasty drew to a close, one sees more than immense tombs. One sees the apex of what the Old Kingdom could achieve when unified under a powerful vision. Each of these pyramids was a marvel of statecraft as much as stonecraft, consuming a significant portion of the kingdom's wealth and manpower, but also undoubtedly inspiring reverence and unity. The pyramids proclaimed that Egypt's kings had reached into the realm of gods and eternity and built monuments that would outlast countless generations. It must have seemed, in those days around 2500 BC, that this triumphant trend could go on forever, that each new pharaoh would continue to raise his own pyramid, perhaps even larger or more splendid than the last, in an unbroken chain of glory. But history would take a different turn. Indeed, the unparalleled achievements of the 4th dynasty would never be repeated. In the 5th and 6th dynasties, circa 2500 to 2200 BC, pharaohs continued to build pyramids, but something had subtly changed. The giants of Giza were not to be reborn. Instead, later pyramids were generally smaller and often less sturdily built, as if the kingdom's breath had grown a bit shorter. We find ourselves at Abusir, a royal necropolis of the 5th dynasty just south of Giza. Here, pharaohs like Sahura, Neferikare, and Niuserre erected their pyramids. In their time, these pyramids were respectable monuments, accompanied by lovely temples decorated with carved reliefs of the king's victories and estates. But today, most of them appear as little more than flattened mounds of rubble. Why? A look at their construction tells the tale. Unlike the great pyramids of the 4th dynasty, which were built with strong limestone core blocks or granite, many 5th dynasty pyramids were built with a core of crumbly rubble or low-quality local limestone, supplemented by mud bricks. They were then encased in a shell of finer limestone to give them smooth faces. This method was quicker and required moving fewer large stones, but it was structurally weaker. When later ages scavenged those outer casing blocks to build new temples, churches, or mosques, the heart of those pyramids bled out in landslides of dust and stone. What we see now are the skeletal remains, denuded of their skins. This decline in size and quality likely mirrors a gradual shift in the kingdom's capabilities and priorities. It suggests that the pharaoh's centralized power, while still significant, was not quite as absolute as it had been a century or two earlier. The royal treasury might not have been able, or willing, to allocate the same colossal resources to a single project. The economy was diversifying, high officials and local governors were gaining more influence and siphoning off some of the wealth and labour for their own family tombs or regional projects. Evidence from tomb inscriptions of the 5th dynasty indicates that provincial nobles were more prominent than before, building elaborate tombs and celebrating their own achievements, which hints that the pharaoh had to share a bit more of the spotlight and resources. There was also a religious shift underway. The cult of Ra, the sun god, had risen to unprecedented prominence in the 5th dynasty. Earlier pharaohs identified primarily with Horus, the sky falcon, or with the concept of a divine king in general. 5th dynasty kings explicitly called themselves Son of Ra in their official titulary. They demonstrated devotion to Ra by building sun temples, specialized open-air temples west of Memphis, where they erected huge obelisks and altars to honor the sun. 2 of these sun temples, at Abu Ghurab, have been excavated, and they suggest that enormous resources, workforce, materials, were poured into the worship of Ra. It's possible that because the pharaohs were investing in these grand public religious monuments, they were content to have somewhat more modest pyramids for their personal tombs. Their legacy was to be shared with the sun, God himself. A ruler like Neferikare might have thought, "My pyramid need not be as massive as Khufu's if I am also building a magnificent temple to Ra that will ensure the god's favour on Egypt." Inside the pyramids of the late 5th and 6th dynasties, other changes appeared that speak to evolving priorities. The last king of the 5th dynasty, Unas, did something revolutionary within his pyramid at Saqqara. He had the interior walls of his burial chamber and antechamber inscribed with hundreds of hieroglyphic spells, the pyramid texts. These texts are liturgies and incantations meant to protect the king's remains and assist his soul in reaching the celestial realms. Up until Unas, the walls of pyramids had been bare, as far as we know. The architecture itself was the magic. But Unas, whose pyramid was the smallest of those at Saqqara, barely 43 meters tall originally, perhaps felt the need to reinforce his journey to eternity with words, in addition to stones. The practice caught on. The kings of the 6th dynasty, like Teti, Pepi I, Merenre and Pepi II, all filled their inner chambers with these beautiful cryptic texts. One could say that as the pyramids shrank in physical grandeur, the Egyptians compensated by making them repositories of sacred knowledge. The focus was shifting from the external monument to the internal, eternal message. It was a brilliant adaptation. A smaller pyramid could still guarantee eternal life if fortified with the proper spells from the god's own book. Yet, even as they found new ways to uphold their royal ideology, the pharaohs of the late Old Kingdom were grappling with mounting challenges. The 6th dynasty, especially under the very long reign of Pepi II, saw signs of weakening central control. Pepi II is said to have ruled more than 90 years, coming to the throne as a young boy and dying as a frail old man. While that sounds impressive, an excessively long reign can breed succession problems. Pepi outlived many of his heirs, and stagnation. Over decades, local governors, nomarchs, grew used to running affairs their own way in distant provinces. They built power bases and, in some cases, small armies of retainers. They still nominally honoured the pharaoh, but the urgency of his absolute authority was fading. In tomb biographies from that time, these officials boast of their own achievements and wealth in ways that would have been unthinkable back in Khufu's day. The delicate balance that sustained the pyramid-building fervour was beginning to tip. There are clues that climate change played a role as well. Records from both ancient writings and modern scientific data indicate that towards the end of the Old Kingdom, Egypt experienced a period of erratic, low Nile floods, part of a larger drought event around 2200 BC. Less water meant poor harvests, perhaps for several years running. The economic strain on a society that depended so directly on the Nile's bounty must have been enormous. Grain shortages can quickly lead to political unrest. A text from a later period, the famous Admonitions of Ipuwer, which might be a reflection or memory of this chaotic time, paints a grim picture. Everywhere barley has perished, and men are stripped of clothes, spice, and oil. The storehouse is empty, and its keeper is stretched on the ground. The rich man is in distress, and the poor man is full of joy. It describes a world turned upside down, famine, social upheaval, perhaps even violence and invasion. It speaks of foreigners entering the delta. Although Ipuwer's text is literary and exaggerative in nature and written centuries later, the kernel of truth is that the Old Kingdom's end was accompanied by hardship and fragmentation. By around 2150 BC, after Pepi II's passing, the centralized monarchy in Egypt essentially broke down. What followed is known as the First Intermediate Period, a time of decentralization, rival local dynasties, and a loss of the old order. For a long moment, the flame that had lit the pyramid builders' hearts flickered out. No longer could a single king command the united effort required to raise a stone mountain. Surviving inscriptions and the stark absence of monumental building projects in this era suggest that the royal government, now split among competing claimants and regional lords, lacked both the resources and the authority to embark on anything like a pyramid. Instead, these ephemeral kings, some ruling from the northern city of Heracleopolis, others from Thebes in the south, had to focus on asserting control, fighting each other, or simply surviving year to year. Picture a night during this troubled time of Egypt's collapse. The moon is but a sliver, and darkness shrouds the land. A small group of men moves like shadows across the sands toward a looming shape on the horizon, a great pyramid now centuries old, its white casing stones glowing faintly in the starlight. These men are tomb robbers, driven by desperation and greed. Perhaps a drought has left their families starving. Perhaps lawlessness has given them boldness. They know that within this pyramid, say the pyramid of Pepi the Fern or Unas at Saqqara, lies a trove of precious items: gold, jewellery, fine linen, alabaster vessels filled with perfumes and oils, the burial goods intended to serve a king in his afterlife. Such treasures could feed their children or make them rich in a time when ordinary life has broken down. By torchlight, the robbers find a weak point, a gap where time and decay have opened a seam in the pyramid's casing. Heart-pounding, one man wedges himself through into a narrow passage thick with stale air. The beam of his flickering torch dances over painted hieroglyphs on the walls, the very pyramid texts that promise dire curses on the impious who disrupt the pharaoh's rest. He hesitates, swallowing hard. In the silence, perhaps he can hear his own breath and the scuttle of insects disturbed by the light. But hunger and the hope of wealth harden his resolve. He presses onward, squeezing down passageways that no living person has traversed since the tomb was sealed. His companions follow, dragging tools, crude chisels, wooden levers. Deep in the pyramid's core, they come upon a heavy stone blocking the corridor, a portcullis dropped in place to thwart exactly this kind of intrusion. It takes hours of grueling effort, but eventually they pry open a small gap under it and slither through like snakes. At last they reach the burial chamber. The torchlight falls upon a grand sarcophagus and glitters off faint reflections of gold on a shrine and offerings laid out for the king. The robbers' eyes widen. In that moment, these desperate men behold what was never meant for their eyes, the sacred sanctuary of a god-king. Perhaps one of them mutters a quick apology to the gods, insurance against the curse, before they set to work gathering loot. They stuff small golden amulets into sackcloth bags, yank precious amethyst and turquoise beads off a royal collar, tip over a heavy alabaster jar and find it still contains thick, scented oil. They even chip away at the sarcophagus lid, looking for more. In their rough haste, they scatter dried offerings and disturb the pharaoh's mummy itself, pushing aside the lid and exposing the royal corpse to grab jewellery or the golden death mask. The riches they carry off into the night might feed their families for a year, or buy them land in a lawless time. We do not know their fate. But we do know the fate of the pharaoh's tomb. In that torchlit hour, the carefully laid plans for eternity unravel. The king's body, which was to remain inviolate for millions of years, has been desecrated. His treasures, meant to serve him in the afterlife, have been profaned and scattered. The robbers disappear into the darkness before dawn, leaving the pyramid silent once more, but forever empty. Scenes like this, multiplied across the country and across the years of chaos, spelled the end of the illusion that any tomb, no matter how massive, no matter how ingeniously sealed, could be completely safe from human desperation. Thus, Egypt learned a harsh lesson written not in ink, but in blood and broken stone. No pyramid was impervious to time and turmoil. The very forces that had built these wonders, human labour, faith, ambition, had their dark mirror in human greed, fear, and need. By the end of the first intermediate period, the notion of pharaohs building gargantuan pyramids as a matter of course had faded. It was not that the idea of the pyramid lost its allure. It was simply that the nation could no longer afford or organize such projects, and perhaps had grown wary of their ultimate futility. When at last Egypt was reunified, it came with a cautious revival, a sense of renewal tempered by experience. The reunification happened around 2050 BC. The Theban prince Mentuhotep II defeated his northern rivals and brought the two lands under one rule again, inaugurating what we call the Middle Kingdom. With strong leadership, Egypt entered a new era of stability, prosperity, and artistic flourishing comparable to the Old Kingdom's heights. And indeed, with this rebirth, pharaohs did return to the practice of building pyramids. How could they not? The pyramid was the ultimate symbol of kingship and divine connection, a powerful nod to the glorious past that any new ruler would want to invoke. But the pyramids of the Middle Kingdom could not simply copy the colossi of earlier times. The world had changed, and so had the approach to these monuments. The first king of the new Dynasty 12, Amenemhat I, moved the royal capital north, closer to Memphis, and chose a site at Lisht, on the desert's edge near the Fayum, to build his pyramid. This was a deliberate return to tradition. Lisht is not far from Saqqara and Maidum, tying the new dynasty to the old. From the outside, Amenemhat's pyramid, when completed, looked much like those of old. It was pyramidal in shape, covered in smooth limestone, with a causeway leading to a beautiful mortuary temple, and satellite pyramids for his consorts. But if we peeked beneath that shining exterior, we would see a telling difference. Instead of being composed throughout of large, tightly fitted stone blocks, the core of the pyramid was largely made of mud bricks and rough stones set in a loose fill. Fine limestone was used only where necessary, for the outer casing, for the floors and walls of chambers, and for the temple. In essence, the Egyptians had developed a cost-saving architecture. A solid stone pyramid like Khufu's required an almost unimaginable amount of quarrying and hauling. A mud brick core could be produced with far fewer resources. Mud from the Nile was plentiful and easily formed into bricks. The trade-off was durability. Mud brick erodes quickly when exposed, but presumably they expected the casing to protect it, and perhaps they were more concerned with the pyramid's appearance and function over the short term, centuries, than absolute permanence for millennia. Pharaoh Senusret I, Amenemhat's successor, followed suit with his own pyramid at Lisht. As each king came to the throne, a pyramid complex was begun. Senusret II at El Lahun by the entrance to the Fayum, Senusret III at Dahshur, returning to the site of Sneferu's pyramids, maybe consciously to associate with that golden age, and Amenemhat III, one of the greatest kings of that dynasty, who ambitiously built two pyramids, one at Dahshur, the so-called Black Pyramid, which unfortunately suffered serious structural problems, and another at Hawara near the Fayum, which became his final resting place. Each of these pyramids was more modest in scale than those at Giza. For example, Amenemhat III's Hawara pyramid was about 58 meters tall, roughly 1/3 the height of the Great Pyramid. But the Middle Kingdom pharaohs invested in other ways. The complexes had extensive temples and incredibly intricate substructures designed to protect the burial and confuse robbers. Indeed, Middle Kingdom architects became master tricksters to defend against the kind of plundering that had plagued the first intermediate period. They created false passages and blank slabs that looked like doors but led nowhere. They dug burial chambers deep and then plugged the entry tunnels with massive granite blocks after interment, using gravity and clever engineering to seal them away. Amenemhat III's Hawara pyramid was accompanied by what Herodotus later described as a labyrinth, a sprawling complex of 12 courts and a maze of rooms that could have functioned as an administrative and ceremonial centre, but also as a formidable obstacle to any unauthorised intruder. Senusret III's pyramid at Dashur had its burial chamber hidden not beneath the centre of the pyramid, as was typical, but offset far to one side, reached through a secret passage outside the pyramid's footprint. A dramatic break in pattern meant to outfox would-be tomb raiders. The Middle Kingdom was in many ways a more frugal, practical time than the Pyramid Age of old. The kings of the 12th dynasty were warrior administrators as much as god-kings. They expanded Egypt's borders south into Nubia, built forts, dug canals, and managed a standing army. They had learned, collectively, that the pharaoh's role was not just to bask in divine grandeur, but to actively ensure the welfare and security of the nation. In such a paradigm, it perhaps made sense to moderate the scale of pyramid building. A massive pyramid like Khufu's might have seemed an overspending of effort when Egypt also needed fortresses manned and irrigation works maintained. The Fayum oasis was developed in this period with extensive irrigation projects, likely under Amenemhat III, a sign that royal energies were also devoted to increasing agricultural output for the people. Thus, the pyramids of the Middle Kingdom reflect a balancing act, honouring tradition and projecting royal authority, but not at the expense of bankrupting the treasury or neglecting other duties. They were grand but not grandiose. However, for all their planning and prudence, the Middle Kingdom pharaohs could not guarantee that their eternal houses would remain inviolate any more than the old kings could. In time, all their pyramids too were robbed. If one visits the site of Amenemhat II's pyramid at Dashur or Senusret II's at Lahun today, one sees only stubby remnants. The erosion of mud core and the quarrying of casing stones reduced them to ghostly hills. The mummies of these kings are gone. Their sarcophagi were found later, empty. Some Middle Kingdom pyramids collapsed from internal structural failures even in antiquity. The Black Pyramid of Amenemhat III began to crack and was abandoned during construction. It's sobering to realise that, despite improved tactics, the Egyptians could not ultimately solve the riddle of preserving a tomb forever. The Middle Kingdom ended in the same way as the Old, with decline, division, and foreign invasion, and its monuments too fell prey to time and human hands. By around 1800 BC, the 12th dynasty gave way to a less stable 13th dynasty. Kings came and went rapidly. Some may have started small pyramids that they didn't rule long enough to finish, or that are lost to us. We have the ruins of a couple of likely late Middle Kingdom pyramids at Mazguna, south of Dashur, that were probably begun for rulers like Amenemhat IV or Queen Sobek-Neferu, but they were never completed or were left as bare foundations. Soon, Egypt entered the Second Intermediate Period, a time of fragmenting power. In the north, a foreign Semitic people we call the Hyksos seized control of the delta and ruled as pharaohs in their own right, albeit not recognised by the native Egyptian south. These Hyksos kings, ruling from avarice, showed respect to Egyptian culture. They took Egyptian names, worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own, and likely were buried according to Egyptian customs. Yet, interestingly, they did not, as far as evidence shows, build themselves pyramids. Perhaps the idea was by then considered old-fashioned or too demanding, or more practically, the Nile Delta's geography, wet and lacking the rocky desert plateaus of the south, simply wasn't suitable for pyramid building. The Hyksos seemed content with simpler tombs. Meanwhile, to the south, native Egyptian princes in Thebes kept the embers of Egyptian pride alive, and their burials in this period were also in tombs cut into the mountains, like at Dra Abu el Naga, or small pyramid-like chapels, but nothing on the monumental scale. Thus, for a second time, pyramid construction in Egypt ground to a halt. Decentralization and the presence of foreign rulers pushed grand royal tomb building low on the priority list. But, as before, Egypt's spirit was not permanently dimmed. By 1550 BC, the Theban king Ahmose rallied the southern Egyptians, expelled the Hyksos, and reunified the country once more, inaugurating the New Kingdom, Egypt's third great era of unity and power. One might expect, with Egypt now free, wealthy from plunder and tribute, and more powerful than ever, that the pyramid would make a grand comeback. And indeed, Ahmose did build a pyramid, interestingly enough. He constructed a small pyramid, now ruined, at Abydos, perhaps as a cenotaph or symbolic tomb linked to the cult of his revered grandmother, Queen Tetisheri. In doing so, he was consciously reaching back over 5 centuries to the age of the last great pyramid builders, as if to say, the glory of the old kingdom is reborn in the new. But, tellingly, our Moses pyramid was the last of its kind in Egypt. His successors chose a completely different approach to burial that, in many ways, was the antithesis of the pyramid. Rather than building up to the sky, they would burrow into the earth. Rather than monumental visibility, they would seek obscurity and secrecy. The age of the pyramids had given way to the age of the hidden tombs. The New Kingdom pharaohs, from the mighty Thutmose and Hatshepsut to the Ramesside kings like Ramses II, were no less ambitious or divine in their pretensions than their predecessors. They had access to perhaps even greater wealth, as Egypt became a cosmopolitan empire controlling Nubia and rich trade routes. So why did they stop building pyramids? The simplest answer: security. By the start of the New Kingdom, everyone knew that the pyramids of previous eras, for all their imposing grandeur, had failed to protect the bodies and treasures within. The phrase "pyramids were inevitably plundered" could have been on the lips of every court advisor. The new rulers determined not to offer such an obvious target to thieves. So they moved their tombs to the most remote, secretive place they could find, a barren valley in the desert mountains of Thebes, on the Nile's west bank. This place is today called the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is a narrow, winding defile surrounded by steep limestone cliffs. In ancient times it was accessible only by a rough path. Crucially, the valley has a natural geography that lent itself to hidden burials. The entrances to the tombs could be easily concealed amid rocks, and the entire area could be guarded at a few choke points. Moreover, and perhaps this is poetic fate, the highest peak above the valley is a pyramidal mountain, today named Al-Qurn. It has a pointed, pyramid-like shape that dominates the horizon. In the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, this may have been seen as a natural pyramid provided by the gods. By placing their tombs in the Valley of the Kings beneath this peak, the pharaohs might have felt they were symbolically burying themselves under a pyramid without having to actually build one. In essence, nature built their pyramid for them in Thebes. The shift to the Valley of the Kings happened within a generation or two after Ahmose. Pharaoh Amenhotep I, son of Ahmose, is traditionally credited with being one of the first to be buried in a rock-cut tomb separate from his temple, though his tomb hasn't been definitively identified. The practice was certainly established by Thutmose I, around 1500 BC, whose tomb was cut deep into the valley cliffs. A remarkable inscription by the man who supervised the work, Ineni, still survives. Ineni wrote of Thutmose's tomb, "I supervised the excavation of the cliff tomb of His Majesty, alone, no one seeing, no one hearing." This single line reveals the utmost importance of secrecy. Unlike a pyramid, which was public from the moment it rose from the ground, a valley tomb's very creation was meant to be hush, hush. Workers likely swore oaths of silence. The area of the tomb entrance was perhaps fenced off or declared off-limits under pain of death. When the tomb was completed and the king's mummy interred with fabulous riches, the entrance was sealed and then deliberately buried under debris and rubble to hide it. The location might have been known only to a trusted few priests and officials, who would then continue to perform rituals for the king's spirit in an anonymous chapel far from the actual grave. Imagine the Valley of the Kings during the height of the New Kingdom. The walls of the canyons glow orange in the late afternoon sun. At a guarded entrance to the valley, royal soldiers stand watch, scrutinizing anyone who comes or goes. Deep in a wadi, hidden from distant view, a team of labourers and artisans works by the light of oil lamps. They are cutting a corridor into the heart of the mountain for Pharaoh Hatshepsut's eternal house, or perhaps Amenhotep II's. The hammering of chisels on rock echoes in the confined space. The workers have been carefully selected. They are the crews from Deir el Medina, a state village of tomb artisans sworn to secrecy and well compensated for their pains. Each man knows that the slightest whisper of the tomb's location to an outsider could invite punishment on him and his family. Up on the cliffs, lookouts scan for any unauthorized approach. By day, the valley is a place of intense, if quiet, labor. By night, if one were to peek into the darkness, one might see a procession of priests clambering to a secret entrance, conducting a consecration ritual under stars, then covering the doorway with slabs and sand, wiping away their footprints as they leave. Once a tomb in the valley was completed and sealed, all that visibly remained might be a few cut stone chips or a fading worker's path, signs that the desert winds would soon erase. The king's funerary cult was not practiced at the tomb, as it had been at the foot of each pyramid in the Old Kingdom. Instead, the pharaoh's memorial temple, often called a mansion of millions of years, was built miles away on the edge of the Green Nile floodplain. Take Hatshepsut's splendid mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its terraces and colonnades elegantly blending into the cliffs, or Ramesses II's grand Ramesseum with its pylons and fallen colossal statue. These were places where people could come and pay homage to the deceased king's divine spirit, where priests made daily offerings and recited prayers. They were designed to be impressive, visible, and accessible, filled with statues and reliefs proclaiming the pharaoh's greatness and piety. The tomb, on the other hand, was designed to be invisible, a sanctum no living person should disturb. This separation of the public mortuary temple and the private burial tomb is one of the defining features of New Kingdom royal practices, and it stands in stark contrast to the Old Kingdom, where the pyramid and the mortuary temple were directly linked, components of one complex. Religious ideology too had taken a turn that favoured hidden tombs. The New Kingdom was an era of theological flowering. Funerary texts became far more elaborate than the austere pyramid texts of old. The underworld was conceived as a complicated realm through which the pharaoh's soul must travel at night, accompanying the sun god through 12 caverns or hours, battling monsters and bringing about the rebirth of the dawn. Texts like the Amduat, that which is in the underworld, and the Book of Gates were composed to detail this journey. The walls of New Kingdom tombs were the canvas for these cosmic journeys, richly painted scenes of the pharaoh in his solar bark, of serpents and lakes of fire, of protective deities and gates that needed secret passwords. A pyramid, with its relatively cramped interior, simply did not offer the room for such narrative artwork. But a tomb cut into a mountainside could be as long and winding as the king desired, with corridors, chambers, and niches, all available for decoration. The tombs of pharaohs like Seti, Phinho, or Ramesses III are virtual subterranean palaces with colourful murals covering every inch, depicting the pharaoh's transition through the afterlife in sumptuous detail. In a way, these decorated tombs achieved by art what pyramids achieved by sheer mass. They prepared the king's soul for eternity, but via liturgy and symbolism rather than architectural might. The New Kingdom pharaohs also found new ways to display their might to the world of the living that did not involve tombs. They erected towering obelisks in temple precincts, like those of Thutmose III and Hatshepsut at Karnak, needle-like pyramids in miniature, whose golden tips caught the sun in honour of Ra. They commissioned gigantic statues of themselves, the pair of colossi of Memnon, 18-metre-tall stone figures of Amenhotep III that still sit placidly at the West Bank's edge, or the 4 colossal seated figures fronting the rock-cut temple of Abu Simbel that Ramesses II built in Nubia. These were feats of engineering and artistry equal to moving pyramid blocks, but with a different purpose. They glorified the king's image in places where it could be seen and admired by both Egyptians and foreigners in awe. The statement had shifted from, "I build this so I may live forever," the pyramid's message, to "See how the God-King dominates the present world," the temple and statue's message. Under the influence of Thebes' local god Amun, who rose to become the supreme state deity, merged with Ra as Amun-Ra, the emphasis on grand religious architecture peaked. The Temple of Karnak in Thebes grew into a forest of columns and gateways as each king added to it. The wealth and workforce that one might have spent on a pyramid were now lavished on Karnak's hypostyle hall or on Luxor Temple's courts and statues. These were sanctuaries for the gods and for the king's legacy among his people, not tombs for his body. It's as if the Egyptian kings found a more community-focused outlet for their megalomania. By building for the gods, and incidentally advertising themselves, they perhaps could justify the expenditure more than building a gigantic vault solely for their own corpse. So, through a combination of practical necessity and evolving values, the pyramid was retired as a royal tomb. The New Kingdom elites, interestingly, sometimes incorporated pyramid shapes in their private tomb chapels. Small brick pyramids atop the funerary chapel structure were popular among Theban nobility as markers. But for the kings, the die was cast. Their eternal homes would be hidden in the earth. And for a few hundred years, this system worked fairly well. The Valley of the Kings did see some robberies even during the New Kingdom. In the reign of Ramesses IX, around 1100 BC, records show trials of tomb robbers who had broken into the royal tombs, indicating that the secret had leaked and the lure of gold was unstoppable. By the end of the New Kingdom, virtually all the royal tombs had been breached. In a desperate act of piety and pragmatism, priests of the 21st dynasty gathered many of the mummies of great pharaohs, including Seti the Fern, Ramesses II, and others whose resting places had been desecrated, and hid them in 2 secret caches, one in a shaft in the cliffs at Deir el-Bahri, and another in Amenhotep II's own tomb, effectively creating safe bunkers for the royal dead. These hidden caches remained undisturbed until their dramatic discovery in the late 19th century AD, when modern archaeologists found them. The careful reburial of those kings by the priests suggests that by around 1000 BC, Egyptians acknowledged that even their new system had failed to guarantee eternal security. They lacked the resources or stable authority to do more than gather up the pieces and hope for the best. After the New Kingdom, Egypt never regained the consistent might and stability needed to undertake pyramid construction again. The first millennium BC saw Egypt often divided or under foreign domination. Libyan chiefs, Nubian kings, Persian conquerors, and finally Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Ptolemies, followed by Roman rule. These later rulers integrated into Egyptian society to varying degrees, but none of them resumed the building of pyramids in Egypt. The Saite kings of the late period, 26th dynasty, 7th century BC, revived archaic artistic styles and may have even mummified animals in huge numbers as part of a throwback to old religion. But their own tombs were subterranean chambers in the delta or modest pyramidal tombs of much smaller scale. The Ptolemaic Greek dynasty built magnificent new temples like Edfu and Dendera to honour Egyptian gods, and even designed their own tombs with some Egyptian elements, but they did not adopt pyramid building. The age of pyramids in the land where it was born had closed permanently. However, the idea of the pyramid did not die. In a twist of fate, it found new life to the south of Egypt. The Kushite kings of Nubia, who had once been vassals and then briefly overlords of Egypt, the 25th dynasty, circa 750 to 656 BC, had a great admiration for Egyptian culture. Long after they were expelled from Egypt by the Assyrians, the Nubian kingdom, now centred deeper south at Meroe, continued to flourish. Starting around 300 BC and onward into the early centuries AD, the kings and queens of Meroe built themselves pyramids. These structures were not clones of the Egyptian giants. They were typically much smaller, perhaps 20 to 30 metres tall, and steeper, often built on a plinth with a small attached offering chapel. Constructed of stone blocks, many of them have survived in the deserts of Sudan as sharp, narrow peaks. Over 200 Nubian pyramids are known, dotting sites like Nuri, El Kuru, and Meroe. They testify to how enduring the pyramid idea was. Even centuries after Egypt had moved on, her neighbours took up the torch and made it their own. To the Nubians, pyramids were an assertion that they too were heirs of the pharaohs, worthy of eternal commemoration. Ironically, in sheer number, Sudan today has more standing pyramids than Egypt, a fact that often surprises people, although they are far smaller and later. The Nubian pyramids continued to be built until around the 4th century AD, when the last native African kingdom to use them converted to other burial styles under different cultural influences. Back in Egypt, some echoes of the pyramid shape persisted in more humble contexts. For example, during the New Kingdom, the common workmen's tombs in the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the craftsmen who built the royal tombs, often had a tiny pyramidion or pyramid-shaped superstructure topping a small chapel in front of the actual tomb chamber. It might be only a few feet high, made of brick or stone, a symbolic nod to the notion of resurrection and the sun's rays. In the late period, circa 7th to 4th centuries BC, some private tombs at Saqqara and Thebes included small pyramids as part of their design as well. And even as late as the Greco-Roman period, we have evidence that Egyptians still revered the pyramid form. Small pyramid-shaped vases or models turn up in tombs, and Roman period paintings show Nile landscapes with pyramid-like structures, indicating they remained icons of the landscape. One might wonder, did any later foreign ruler or wealthy individual ever attempt to literally replicate a pharaonic pyramid in Egypt? There's no clear evidence of a full-size attempt, likely because the knowledge, infrastructure, and will had all faded. Building a pyramid was a national enterprise. By the first millennium BC, Egypt was frequently under rulers who had their own cultural burial preferences. For instance, the Persians built rock-cut tombs in Iran, not pyramids. The Greeks built mausoleums or used catacombs. However, interestingly, the allure of the pyramid did reach as far as Rome. In the 1st century BC, a Roman nobleman named Caius Cestius, enamoured of all things Egyptian, built himself a pyramid tomb in Rome. The pyramid of Cestius, about 37 metres high, still stands near the Porta San Paolo, a solitary pyramid in Europe, inspired directly by those of Egypt that had so captured the Roman imagination after the conquest of Egypt. Throughout the Middle Ages, the pyramids of Giza and a few others visible like those at Saqqara continued to fuel imagination and myth. Travellers from Arabia and Europe wrote fanciful tales about them, that they were granaries of Joseph from the Bible, or treasure houses of ancient kings, or repositories of magical knowledge. They stood in silent grandeur as the world changed around them. At one point, as mentioned earlier, the Ayyubid Sultan al-Aziz in the 12th century tried to dismantle them for stone, but even with medieval manpower he managed to put only a gash in Menkaur's pyramid before abandoning the effort as hopeless. The pyramids were simply too well built, too massive to be easily pulled apart, a testament to their makers. Thus they earned a sort of inviolability, not through magic but through sheer engineering might, outlasting the intentions even of those who would erase them. In modern times the pyramids have become almost synonymous with Egypt itself, enduring symbols of the country's ancient heritage, and a magnet for wonder and speculation. But crucially, part of what makes them so intriguing is that there are only a few of them relative to what one might expect for a civilization that lasted 3,000 years. This rarity gives each pyramid an outsized significance. It's often said that Egypt has over 100 pyramids, which is true if you count every small one, but the number of large royal pyramids that dominate the landscape is a few dozen at most, and truly only the handful from the Old and Middle Kingdoms remain recognizable monuments. As centuries rolled on, the Egyptians themselves began to see the pyramids as relics of a golden age. By the time of the New Kingdom, a papyrus poem extolled, "Is there anything like former times?" pointing to the pyramids and temples of the past as wonders never to be attained again. Kings like Khaem-Weset, son of Rameses II, took it upon themselves to restore or at least graffiti their names onto Old Kingdom pyramids, preserving them as links to a revered past. The lack of new pyramids made the existing ones even more special, objects of pilgrimage and nostalgia. Even today, the story of the pyramids isn't completely closed, not in the sense of building them anew, but in discovering those that have been forgotten. Modern archaeological techniques are revealing that Egypt might indeed have more pyramids. Only they are not new constructions, but old ones hidden beneath the sands. Over the past 2 centuries, archaeologists have identified at least about 118 pyramid structures in Egypt. Many of these are small, heavily ruined, or buried. Early explorers like Lepsius in the 19th century compiled lists of pyramids, but the desert can deceive. Some things visible in 1850 vanished under sand dunes by 1950, and others that were hidden have since been exposed by winds or found through investigation. In 2008, archaeologists digging in Saqqara rediscovered the Headless Pyramid, which turned out to belong to a long obscure king named Menkaure from the 5th dynasty, a pyramid noted by Lepsius lost to sand and found again. In recent years, advances in satellite imagery and infrared sensing have allowed researchers like Dr. Sarah Parkak to scan vast tracts of Egypt for telltale geometric shapes beneath the surface. In 2011, one such survey excited the world with news of potentially 17 undiscovered pyramids, as well as thousands of tombs and settlements detected as subsurface anomalies. While not all these leads have panned out, some pyramid signatures turned out to be natural features or mud brick enclosures, The promise remains that more small pyramids or pyramidal foundations could lie awaiting discovery. In our own time, the search for hidden pyramids continues in a very different fashion from Howard Carter's day of pure spadework. Picture a team of scientists peering at a computer screen in a lab. On the screen is a high-contrast satellite image of the Egyptian desert, processed in infrared to reveal subtle differences in density underground. Amid the washes of grey and black representing sand and rock, a lighter rectangle or symmetrical mound catches their eye, something human-made perhaps, beneath a layer of soil. Excitement buzzes in the room. An expedition is planned. Out in the field under the same blazing sun that beat down on Khufu's work gangs, archaeologists unload ground-penetrating radar equipment. They methodically walk the device over the suspect area in a grid pattern. The radar pulses into the ground and reflects back. On a monitor, a ghostly outline appears. Straight lines, maybe even the angles of a square structure buried a few meters below. The team breaks into a smile. It seems a buried monument is indeed there. Carefully they begin to dig, brushing aside sand that has been undisturbed for ages. In a few days they uncover the corner of a wall made of limestone blocks. As more sand is cleared, a small platform comes to light. Could it be the base of a pyramid? Weeks of excavation reveal a pyramidion stone, the capstone fallen and buried, and an inclined side of what was once a pyramid about 20 meters at the base. The hieroglyphs on a fragment of block give a clue to the owner, perhaps a minor king of a chaotic era or the tomb of a queen whose name was never recorded in surviving lists. A new pyramid has entered the catalogue of Egypt's royal tombs, not new in age, but new in our knowledge. Each such find, rare as they are, sparks headlines and imagination around the world. It reminds us that the sands still hold secrets, that even after 2 centuries of scholarly exploration, we haven't completely exhausted the legacy of the pyramid builders. The use of satellites and radar is like a conversation across time between the pyramid builders and us. They, the ancient Egyptians, aligned their pyramids with the stars and cardinal points, believing in a cosmic harmony. We, with eyes in the sky, search for their works with the tools of cosmic technology. There is a nice symmetry in that. And every time we find even a foundation trench or a portion of a long-lost pyramid, we are reminded that impermanence and endurance dance together in Egypt's story. Many pyramids have crumbled or vanished, yet traces remain, and as long as those traces exist, the pyramid's tale continues to evolve. Ultimately, the question, why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids, leads us to a deeper appreciation of those pyramids that do grace the Egyptian sands. Their rarity is not an accident, but a result of all the complex forces we've traced. It's often said that knowledge of limits is what separates a great society from a self-destructive one. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians, after a point, understood their limits, or were forced to confront them. They realized that endless pyramid building was unsustainable, either materially or spiritually. They adapted, changed course, and explored new ways of commemorating their dead and celebrating their kings. And so the pyramids stand isolated, magnificent singular peaks of achievement rather than a continuous mountain range. Now we return to the silent desert, in our mind's eye, at the break of dawn. The eastern sky blossoms from black to deep purple to gold. The first rays of sunlight strike the tips of Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza and Djoser's Step Pyramid far down the river at Saqqara. In those quiet moments, these ancient giants cast long blue shadows over the cooling sands. Each shadow is a reminder of a king and an epoch, a Khufu, a Djoser, a Sneferu, and of the collective will of a people who, for a time, achieved the seemingly impossible. Beyond the reach of those shadows lies the open desert, empty of pyramids. That emptiness is as eloquent as the monuments themselves. It speaks of the ebb in the tide of time, of the fact that the fervour and conditions that raised those giants came and went and did not come again. Perhaps the very scarcity of pyramids is part of why they so seize our imagination. Had dozens upon dozens of great pyramids littered the Nile from the Delta to Nubia, maybe we would find them almost commonplace, an expected skyline. But there is only one great pyramid, flanked by only two other major pyramids at Giza, and then a scattering of smaller cousins here and there. We can name the key pyramids on our fingers. They stand unique, each has its own character and story. The Step Pyramid stands alone as the first of its kind, a lone sentinel in the sands of Saqqara. The Bent Pyramid at Dashur stands with its peculiar profile, half straight, half bent, whispering about the engineering crisis its builders faced and overcame in their own way. The Red Pyramid nearby stands serene and changeless, Sneferu's triumph and the first true pyramid. Giza's triad looms like eternal mountains, the Great Pyramid austere and massive, Khafra's slightly smaller but elegant with its surviving cap of casing, Menkar's charmingly smaller with its history of attempted demolition leaving scars. There are others, yes. The pyramid of Yusakaf at Saqqara crumbled nearly flat. The pyramid of Unaz, small but historically rich with its texts. The pyramids of the 5th dynasty queens, little satellites to the big ones. The mud brick pyramids of the Fayum, subdued and half melted. And the later pyramids of Nubia, standing sharp against the Sudanese sky. Each is a gem of a chapter in a very long story. Each invites wonder. If pyramids had been as common as temples or tombs, would we feel the same mystique? Unlikely. There is something profoundly poetic about their loneliness in the desert. They are like solitary sages seated in meditation, giant triangular silhouettes contemplating eternity while the world changes around them. They hint at what is possible when human aspiration reaches its loftiest heights, but also at what is transient when those heights cannot be sustained. In those ancient days, the Egyptians often likened a well-ruled state to a finely balanced creation. They thought if the pharaoh failed in his duties, the world could collapse into chaos. Building a pyramid was the ultimate act of balance between heaven and earth, between the immense weight of stone and the delicate alignments of astronomy, between the back-breaking toil of thousands and the soaring hopes invested in the final product. It required a delicate balance in society as well. The farmers had to produce enough surplus to feed labourers. The bureaucracy had to function with precision to gather materials from across the realm. The nobles had to cooperate. The priesthood had to sanction the effort. And the environment had to cooperate with good harvests. If any of those factors faltered, the enterprise would strain or fail. In a way, a pyramid was a barometer of the health of the kingdom. The huge pyramids arose only when all conditions were optimal. Their absence in later times underscores how rarely such conditions converge. And what of human ambition? The pyramids undeniably represent a kind of supreme ambition, an attempt to cheat death through monumentality, to make a hill of man-made stone that will resist the ravages of time. And for a remarkable span, they have done so. Yet tomb robbers and decay still reached within, teaching a humbling lesson that no matter how grand our works, absolute permanence is an illusion. The pharaohs sought immortality through those stones and largely achieved it, but not exactly as they imagined. They live on not as sovereigns enjoying their grave goods in the afterlife, but as names in history and as mummies in museums, as characters in our stories. The impermanence of their original intentions does not diminish the awe we feel. In fact, it adds a layer of poignancy. We stand before the pyramids today and marvel not just at their size, but at the audacity of humans long gone, and at the inexorable flow of time that even these stones have subtly yielded to, with their weathered edges and missing casings. We feel a connection across time, a mix of admiration and melancholy. The scarcity of pyramids in Egypt tells us that such peaks of human endeavour are rare by nature. Greatness in any civilization is a rare and delicate flower that blooms only when many conditions are just right, and even then it cannot bloom perpetually. It has its season, and then it passes. The pyramid's lonely dominance on the landscape reminds us of this. They are like the highest of high tide marks on the shore of history. You can see how far the water of human will and ability once rose before it receded. In the end, Egypt doesn't have more pyramids because Egypt, as wise as it was, evolved beyond needing to build mountains each time a king died. The Egyptians found other expressions for their culture's soul, in literature, in art, in smaller but still meaningful monuments, and in the hearts of the people who continued to worship in the shadow of old monuments. One might even say the Egyptians learned a lesson in sustainability. The Old Kingdom's pyramid building was spectacular, but contributed perhaps to its downfall, economically or symbolically. The Middle and New Kingdoms sought a more balanced approach, still grand, but more sustainable. Whether or not that was a conscious choice, it was a fortuitous one that allowed their civilization to last another 1,000 years and more. Now, as the sun climbs higher over Giza, the Great Pyramid casts a shrinking shadow at its base. Tourists begin to mill about, looking like tiny specks next to those gigantic blocks, snapping photographs that flatten the pyramid into 2 dimensions, never quite capturing its bulk or the feel of the place. A camel driver leads his camel along the road, the animal's feet padding softly in the sand, indifferent to the wonder around it. Life in modern Egypt goes on around these ancient sentinels. The pyramids are no longer focal points of a living religion. They have become monuments of memory. And yet their presence is powerful. The rarity of their kind means that to see them in person is an experience few forget. They inspire not just because they are big. Many things in our modern world are big, but because they are full of meaning and because they stood at the crux of so many human stories. Think of all the lives that a single pyramid encapsulated, the king who ordered it, dreaming of eternity, the architect who planned it, perhaps fearful yet determined to please his God-king, the tens of thousands of workers, farmers, masons, haulers, potters, bakers, brewers, who contributed their sweat and skills to build it, in hope of divine favour or at least good rations. The priests who consecrated it and then tended its altars, carrying the torch of memory forward. The thieves who later dared to violate it, driven by hunger or greed, and thus wrote the final chapter of its initial purpose. The archaeologists who, in modern times, painstakingly cleared its chambers again, seeking knowledge and attempting to understand its makers. Multiply these human dramas by each pyramid that was built, and consider that those dramas did not extend indefinitely because new pyramids stopped being built. Each pyramid we see is thus a completed epic with a beginning, middle, and end, rather than part of an endless continuum. That is partly why they feel monumental in time, not just in space. As our journey through this story draws to an end, we reflect on the paradox that sometimes less is more. Egypt doesn't have more pyramids, and that very fact makes the pyramids it does have all the more significant. They carry the weight of history that could have been spread over a larger number of monuments, but instead is concentrated in a few. They are precious rarities. Their endurance is a stroke of luck and design. Their survival is a dialogue between the intentional, their solid construction, and the circumstantial, sands preserving them, later peoples valuing them enough not to dismantle them entirely. The giants rose and the giants fell, not literally, for most still stand, but in the sense that the era that produced them ended. The questions linger in their absence, questions of mortality and ambition, of how a society chooses to remember its dead, of what is worth pouring resources into, and what legacy really means. The pyramids tease us with those questions and remain sphinx-like in their silence. We, the living, supply the answers through our study and our imagination. In a way, the pyramids did achieve a form of immortality, not the literal one the pharaohs might have hoped. None rose bodily to live among the stars as a living god-king in the flesh, but a cultural immortality. They have made their builders and the times in which they were built immortal in human memory. 5,000 years on, we still talk about Djoser and Khufu and their architects. We still feel awe at what was accomplished, and we still feel a slight sadness that we can never see that world at its peak except through the faint echo that is an empty pyramid. Perhaps that is the truest kind of immortality any human can achieve, to be remembered and to inspire long after one's own time. The pyramids ensured that for their kings, so why doesn't Egypt have more pyramids? Because the stars of history aligned in certain moments to raise a pyramid, and those moments, like all moments, passed. Because Egypt's people and rulers grew, adapted, and chose other paths to eternity. Because even for a civilization as mighty as the pharaohs, there were limits to what could or should be done. The rarity of pyramids is a testament to the precious, ephemeral alignment of factors that give rise to any great human achievement. It's what makes them special and what lends them their aura of mystery. The desert wind blows lightly as our narrative comes to a close. We leave that lone figure standing where we began, in the quiet company of the pyramids as the day's first light breaks. The giants of stone keep their own counsel, as they have for ages. In their looming silence and in the vacant sands around them, we find a profound answer. Great things are rare. The pyramid's existence and the absence of more like them tell a story of impermanence, ambition, and the delicate balance required for greatness to rise. It is a story written in stone and sand, in light and shadow, and as long as those forms endure on the horizon, mankind will continue to ponder their rise and marvel at their solitude, learning again and again that sometimes the finest chapters of our history derive their power as much from what does not continue as from what does, from the silence after the music as much as from the music itself. The pyramids of Egypt stand, in the end, as eternal witnesses to the peaks of human aspiration and to the wisdom of knowing that such peaks, by their nature, cannot fill the whole landscape of time. The afternoon sun hangs low over the Nile, drenching the river in molten gold. Warm light dances on the water's surface as a gentle breeze ripples through the reeds along the banks. In the shallows, a chorus of children's laughter erupts. A skinny boy and his sister splash each other, their bronze bodies gleaming with river water. The girl balances on a floating bundle of papyrus stalks, arms outstretched like a bird, squealing in delight as her brother lunges playfully and tips her into the cool blue shallows. They disappear with a splash, then pop up again amid the lily pads, laughing and gasping for breath. Their joyous shouts echo over the water, carrying all the way to a cluster of mud brick houses nestled on the shore. Under the shade of a lone date palm, Two farmers pause in their work to watch the children at play. One wipes sweat from his brow and leans on his shovel, a grin softening the lines of his sun-weathered face. The other chuckles, calling out a teasing encouragement to the boy to dunk his sister again. A moment later, the men return to repairing an irrigation channel, but their eyes still sparkle with amusement. Not far away, a fisherman stands knee-deep in the Nile, casting a net and humming a tune under his breath. Each time he glances at the splashing children, the tune picks up in tempo, inspired by their energy. On the riverbank behind him, a woman with a clay jug balanced on her head stops to enjoy the scene. She remembers her own childhood in these waters and smiles before continuing on, the faint sound of her ankle bracelets jingling as she goes. Nearby, beneath a simple reed-roofed porch attached to a mud-brick cottage, a family has gathered in the golden light. An old man with silvered hair sits cross-legged on the ground, peering intently at a grid of squares painted on a slab of wood, the board of an ancient game called senet. Opposite him, his adult son holds a handful of small sticks, shaking them and then tossing them onto the ground as dice. The sticks clatter and the son moves his game piece 2 spaces forward. Immediately the grandfather cackles with glee. With a sly grin, he slides one of his own pieces to block his son's path on the board. The younger man groans in theatrical defeat, and the rest of the family bursts into laughter, mother, siblings, and a giggling toddler balanced on the mother's hip. The grandmother, stirring a pot of lentils over a small cooking fire, shoots the men an amused look and chides, "Don't let him fool you. He's been playing since Pharaoh Joseph's day." This prompts another round of laughter. The air smells of wood smoke and boiling beans, mingling with the sweet scent of ripe dates drying on mats. A scrawny dog naps at their feet, its ears flicking at the sound of its family's mirth. In this sun-drenched slice of afternoon, ancient Egypt is not a land of silent statues or solemn tombs. It is alive with human warmth. Here, along the Nile's edge, life's simple joys reign. We hear it in every splash and every chuckle, a timeless delight in living. It might surprise us, given how much the Egyptians spoke of death and the afterlife, to find them so exuberantly engaged in the pleasures of the here and now. But the people of the Nile Valley believed that life was a gift of the gods, to be cherished and filled with joy. Yes, they built mighty pyramids and prepared their dead for eternity, but they also danced under the stars, sang songs at twilight, played games by lamplight, and savoured the sweet taste of each day. They wanted to live life to its fullest, to experience all that their time on earth had to offer, and they looked forward to carrying those joys into the next world. What did the ancient Egyptians do for fun? Imagine stepping into their world and discovering that answer not through dusty lists of facts, but by living it alongside them. We will wander from the humble courtyards of common folk to the gilded halls of pharaohs, from the hush of twilight story circles to the raucous roar of festival crowds. We'll join children as they play beside the Nile and follow musicians' melodies into candle-lit banquet rooms. We'll witness athletic young men wrestling in the sand for glory and laughter, and feel the pounding drums as dancers twirl in worship of the gods of joy. We will drink and revel under the blazing Egyptian sun during festivals that honoured gods with pure celebration. Through archaeology and art, through the stories they left behind and the echoes of laughter in ancient texts, we will glimpse a culture that wove fun and festivity into the very fabric of existence. Our journey begins in the quiet moments of daily life, the games, stories, and amusements that brightened ordinary days. From there, it will sweep us into the intoxicating revels of grand festivals and public celebrations, where entire cities came alive with music, feasting, and dance. We will peek into elegant, noble gardens where laughter mingled with the perfume of lotus blossoms at sunset, and we'll tiptoe into village squares where common folk gathered to sing and celebrate the simple fact of being alive. As we travel through this world of ancient Egyptian leisure, keep in mind that for these people, fun was never just escapism. It was an affirmation of Ma'at, the divine harmony of the universe. Joy had meaning, music, games, and laughter were threads that tied them to each other, to their gods, and to eternity itself. So find a comfortable seat in the shade. Perhaps imagine a cup of cool date wine in hand. The day is warm and bright, the Nile sparkles invitingly, and somewhere not far off a flute is playing a playful tune. It's time to journey back in time and discover what brought smiles and laughter to the people who lived under the pharaohs, to see the ancient Egyptians at play, their hearts full of life, even in the shadow of the pyramids. As dusk begins to purple the sky, the family's Senet game winds down. The grandfather triumphantly moves his last piece off the board, winning the match. Amid good-natured groans and applause, the wooden pieces are gathered up and the game board set aside. They will surely play again tomorrow night, as they do most evenings. Senet is more than just a pastime to them. It is practically an institution. The game's grid of 30 squares holds a rich symbolism that the family only dimly understands but deeply appreciates. In their language, Senet means the game of passing, and many say it represents the journey of the soul through the dangers of life and into the peace of the afterlife. As the last rays of sunlight filter through the doorway, the grandfather reverently places the board on a shelf beside a small statue of the household gods. He handles it with care, for this board, carved smooth by years of use, might one day be placed in his own tomb, ensuring he has something to do for fun in eternity. Board games were beloved across all of Egypt. From humble labourers to mighty pharaohs, everyone enjoyed a good game. Earlier that day, in a painted palace colonnade catching the midday breeze, 2 elegant women in linen gowns also knelt across a Senet board, mirroring the humble scene in the cottage. One was no less than the queen herself, the favourite wife of Rameses the Great, Queen Nefertari, and in the cool shadows of her garden pavilion she moved her ebony and ivory pieces with the same competitive gleam in her eye as any village elder. Artists later immortalised Nefertari in her tomb painting, shown calmly playing Senet in the afterlife as if even beyond death she intended to keep having fun. Many pharaohs were buried with finely crafted Senet sets of their own, from cedarwood boards inlaid with gold to simple grids scratched by a workman on a limestone slab for his grave. The message was the same. Life's pleasures were meant to last forever. Indeed, Egyptians hoped that in the field of reeds, their heaven, one could play endless games of Senet under blissful blue skies, never growing bored. Senet may have been the most popular game, but it was far from the only one. The Egyptians invented and enjoyed many others. In wealthier circles, for example, they played a game modern people call hounds and jackals, featuring pegs shaped like little dogs and jackals. Players raced their animal-headed pieces along winding tracks of holes on a wooden board, competing to reach the finish first. This game became a fad during the Middle Kingdom. A beautifully preserved set was discovered in a noble's tomb at Thebes, and even the boy king Tutankhamun was buried with an ornate hounds and jackals board by his side. Clearly, even pharaohs relished a bit of friendly competition. Back in our little village home, the children now clamour for a turn at a different pastime. The mother pulls out a curious circular board painted with the spiral of a coiled snake. This game is called Mehen, the serpent game. It was ancient even then, an heirloom from the time of the pyramids, said to be the oldest board game in the world. The board's snake coils around to a central goal, and the players race using lion-shaped pieces and tiny marbles. As they play, the father explains the legend behind the game. Each night, the sun god Ra sails through the underworld, threatened by a giant serpent of chaos named Apophis. But Ra is protected by Mehen, the divine snake that coils around him. "See," the father points to the board's painted serpent, "we are like Ra, journeying safely inside the coils. But beware, if Apophis strikes, we must start again." The children's eyes widen at this bit of mythic drama injected into their game. Whether or not this was truly the intended meaning of Mehen, it makes the play exciting. The players throw down their knucklebone dice, hop their lion pieces along the snake's back, and shriek whenever someone's piece is sent back to the tail. For a moment, they are heroes voyaging through the night, outwitting monsters with each lucky roll. In another corner of the room, the grandmother watches the youngsters play Mehen and smiles. In her lap, she holds a carved wooden baboon, a toy that doubles as a figurine of the god Bes, the household deity of laughter, music, and good times. Bes is often depicted as a stout, dwarf-like figure sticking out his tongue and shaking a rattle, scaring off evil spirits and tickling families into smiles. The grandmother runs her thumb over the baboon's polished head thoughtfully. Fun and protection in one, such was the Egyptian way. Setting the figurine aside, she reaches into a wicker basket and pulls out a handful of toys to amuse the restless toddler at her feet. A clay rattle that still makes a cheerful jingle, a stuffed cloth doll with hair made from twisted palm fibres, and a tiny wooden crocodile with a jaw that snaps open and shut when a string is pulled. These simple toys have survived generations, and similar ones have been found by modern archaeologists tucked into tombs. Silent testimony that even a child's playthings were treasured enough to travel into eternity with them. Tonight, the living children pile them up to invent an impromptu game. The toddler hugs the rag doll while the older ones take turns poking at the crocodile, daring each other to pull its string and yelping in mock terror when its wooden jaws clack shut. As darkness falls, an oil lamp is lit, casting a warm flicker over the cosy scene. The day's work is done, and now is the time for stories. The family gathers in a circle, faces illuminated by the dancing flame. Outside, 1,000,000 stars begin to pierce the velvet sky. Inside, imagination is about to take flight. Storytelling is perhaps the Egyptians' favourite entertainment of all, a tradition as old as the Nile. In an age where most people cannot read or write, the spoken word carries the magic of theatre, library, and school all in one. And so, with the children nestled close, the grandfather clears his throat and begins a tale that he heard from his own grandfather years ago. Long ago, during the reign of King Sneferu, the great pyramid builder, he intones, there lived a pharaoh who grew bored and listless, for nothing could make him laugh. The grandfather's voice is low and gravelly, and the children lean in eagerly. He continues, eyes twinkling. So his chief scribe suggested a remedy, to sail in a boat rowed by the most beautiful young women of the palace. 20 maidens with nets for garments, rowing up and down the royal lake. The mother gasps in mock scandal, and the kids giggle, already picturing the scene. And lo and behold, the old man chuckles. The king's heart was glad at the sight. But as the girls rowed, one dropped her green gem into the water and began to weep. King Sneferu could not bear to see her unhappy. So what do you think happened? The oldest boy, familiar with this beloved story, jumps in. The scribe used magic to split the waters and fetch the gem. Yes, the grandfather beams. He describes how the scribe spoke a secret spell. The waters of the lake parted into towering walls, and the precious green jewel lay gleaming on the lake bed. As the gem was returned to the girl, the waters crashed back down, and King Sneferu laughed and laughed, his boredom cured. Around the circle, everyone is smiling at the image of a mighty king finding joy in such a whimsical adventure. Unbeknownst to them, they've essentially heard a 4,000-year-old short story from the Westcar Papyrus, a tale that would one day be written on fragile papyrus scrolls and rediscovered by archaeologists millennia later. But tonight it lives only in their voices and minds. Emboldened by the success of his first tale, the grandfather launches into another, this one a ghost story to send delicious shivers down spines. He tells of a prince named Setna who discovered a magic book hidden in a tomb, even after the inhabitants of the tomb begged him not to. Against their warnings, Setna stole it, only to be haunted by a stunning enchantress who lured him with promises of love. With dramatic pauses and a waggle of his eyebrows, the old man describes how Setna gave away all his riches for a single night of passion, even agreeing to kill his own children, only to awaken from the enchantment, standing naked in the street, with his dignity in tatters. The children gasp and giggle at the absurdity and fright of it. "And that," concludes the grandfather, "is why you don't anger the spirits, or chase after strange women." The adults roar with laughter at his playful moral. They know this story too. It's a favourite in Memphis and carries a wink of a lesson about both greed and lust being punished by the gods. At this point, seeing that some of the younger children look a bit wide-eyed from the spooky tale, the grandmother smiles and decides to end the evening with a gentler story to soothe everyone before bed. In a soft melodic voice she begins the tale of the shipwrecked sailor, a popular adventure with a hopeful message. She tells of a sailor who was lost at sea, the sole survivor when his ship was swallowed by a sudden storm. Washed up on a mysterious island, the sailor despaired, until he found the island was a paradise of fruits and calm pools, and home to a marvellous being, a gigantic serpent with scales of gold and a beard of pure lapis lazuli. The children's mouths form perfect O's as they imagine the splendid snake. But instead of devouring the sailor, the grandmother recounts, the serpent spoke with a wise, kindly voice. This serpent king of the island listened to the sailor's plight and comforted him, saying it was the will of the gods that he had survived. The serpent even revealed his own sorrow. All his fellow serpents, his family, had been killed by a falling star long ago, and he was now alone on the island. In the flickering lamplight, the family listens raptly as the grandmother describes how the sailor lived on the island for 4 months, befriended by the gentle serpent who taught him that every life is touched by loss, but also by grace. When it was time for the sailor to return home, the serpent loaded his boat with gifts, spices, precious ebony, baboon fur, and rare incense. "You shall reach home in Egypt," the serpent promised, "and you will kiss your wife and see your house again. All this is destiny." True to the serpent's word, a rescue ship appeared. The sailor tried to bring his wonderful friend along, but the serpent chose to remain, vanishing into the waves as the sailor sailed away. He returned to Egypt safely, laden with the serpent's riches, and when he told his tale to the pharaoh, the king said, "Wise is he who has experienced such things and lived to tell of them." As the grandmother finishes, she assures the children that the sailor lived out his days grateful and content, knowing that a divine hand can guide us through even the darkest storm to safe shores. The family releases a collective breath, smiles replacing any lingering trepidation. This comforting tale of deliverance washes away the eerie thrills of the ghost story and leaves them with a sense of wonder and reassurance. For hours the stories continue, weaving worlds within the humble home. They recount the adventures of heroes like Sinuhe, who fled his homeland and fought for a foreign king, only to yearn for Egypt again. They tell of the shipwrecked sailor's miraculous encounter we just heard. They even swap the latest silly gossip about ghosts in the village. Each story holds a lesson: courage, loyalty, humility, love, and as the night deepens, those lessons settle gently into listening hearts. But more than anything, the stories bring delight. They draw the family together in a shared dream, erasing the hardships of the day. In the flickering lamplight, the wrinkles on the grandmother's face soften as she watches her family enraptured by the old tales. For a little while in these stories they can be anything: princes, warriors, clever peasant girls who outsmart pharaohs, or just travellers seeing the wider world through words. By the time the lamp's oil is nearly spent, the children are nodding off, heads drooping onto their mothers' laps. The last tale trails off, and a satisfied silence fills the hut. The ancient Egyptians have no separate word for our concept of a fictional story. To them, these tales are a natural extension of reality and religion, a way to make sense of the world and also to revel in its mysteries. Tonight, as every night, storytelling has done its job well. It has entertained, educated, and bound the family closer in both laughter and tears, for one of the love stories made the women wipe their eyes surreptitiously. In a culture where papyrus scrolls are precious and literacy a specialized skill, the oral tradition is the people's library of the imagination. Through these tales told under starlight, the Egyptians pass on wisdom and joy from one generation to the next. Finally, the mother coaxes the sleepy children up and off to their straw mats. The family members bid each other good night with gentle smiles. Tomorrow will be another day of toil under the sun, planting, building, baking, ferrying goods. But they know now, as they drift to sleep, that tomorrow evening will bring its own small celebration, perhaps another game, perhaps another story, or a song shared over a cup of beer. This promise of leisure after labour is a comfort as real as the soft glow soon visible on the eastern horizon. In ancient Egypt, every day held moments of joy waiting to be claimed, like flowers that bloom when the work is done. In those precious hours of play and storytelling, they affirmed what they cherished most: life itself, here and now, sweet and irrepressible. Meanwhile, across the river in the estate of a wealthy noble, night has fallen, but the festivities are only just beginning. Flame-lit torches crackle in the gardens, throwing playful shadows across rows of date palms and blooming lotus pools. Servants bustle about, laying out platters of roast duck, figs and bread on low tables, and refilling elegant alabaster cups with sweet wine. High-pitched laughter and the murmur of conversation drift from a grand open pavilion decorated with flowery garlands. Here, under a ceiling painted with stars, Egypt's elite recline on plush cushions, dressed in their finest linen. Men wear crisp white kilts pleated to perfection, and women glide in flowing semi-transparent gowns that cling softly to their forms. Almost every guest, man and woman alike, sports a perfumed wax cone atop their wig or braided hair. As the warmth of the gathering continues, these cones slowly melt, releasing waves of fragrance, the rich scent of myrrh, lotus blossom and cinnamon that mix with the night air. The aroma is heady and luxurious, befitting the opulence of the scene. At a signal from the host, the entertainment commences. A troupe of musicians enters and bows, young men and women carrying harps and lyres, lutes and flutes, hand drums and ivory clappers. They begin to play a lively tune. The harpist draws his fingers across the taut strings, producing a shimmering cascade of notes. A flutist trills a melody as sweet as birdsong over a steady, hypnotic beat of drums. Immediately the conversation hushes and all eyes turn to the centre of the pavilion. There, 2 dancers appear, moving with sinuous grace. They are barely clothed, wearing only glittering collars at their throats and jewelled belts hung with beads that sway and shimmer with each movement. Their skin glistens with perfumed oil under the torchlight. As the music builds, the dancers twirl and bend acrobatically. They arch backwards until their hands touch the floor, then flip gracefully to their feet, eliciting gasps of delight from the audience. The beads of their belts click softly with each gyration of their hips. One dancer balances on her toes, arms undulating like a river reed in the breeze, while the other performs a series of flips and cartwheels, her jewels flashing. Cheers and claps erupt from the nobles. Even the dignified high priest can't help but grin in amazement. The mood is infectious. Servants carrying wine pause to tap their feet. Some guests begin clapping along to the rhythm, while others snap their fingers or ululate sharp trills of encouragement. The pavilion fills with an atmosphere of pure joy, hierarchies momentarily forgotten in the shared enjoyment of music and motion. A few tipsy guests rise from their couches and join a spontaneous line dance, laughing as they mimic the professionals' moves with far less grace. The lead harpist smiles and seamlessly transitions the music into a well-known folk tune that everyone knows. Suddenly the whole party is singing, a cheerful chorus praising the goddess Hathor, patroness of love, beauty, and merriment. "Joy, O Hathor, fill our hearts," they sing, raising their drinks in salute. Hathor's presence is almost tangible tonight. After all, she is often called Mistress of Jubilation, and it is said she and her entourage of musicians reside in every hall where music and laughter flow. In the corner of the pavilion, an elderly blind harpist sits plucking at a smaller harp, preparing for the next set. He begins a more soulful melody, and the party gradually quiets to listen. His fingers dance over the strings as he sings a song of the harper, those ancient verses that remind everyone to embrace the moment. His voice is raspy but rich with emotion. "Follow your heart as long as you live. Put incense on your head and garlands around your neck. Dance and make merry. Do not weary of it." Some guests nod along solemnly. These words come from the wisdom of their ancestors, inscribed in tombs, yet alive in music. Even at a revel, the Egyptians savour a touch of poetry and philosophy intermingled with pleasure. When the harpist finishes, a respectful silence follows, then warm applause. A noblewoman dabs at a tear, perhaps thinking of a loved one departed, but then raises her cup and toasts to this life and the next. Moments later, the mood bounces back to merriment. A group of servant girls brings out new jugs of beer and wine, while others hand each guest a fresh lotus flower. The attendees inhale the bloom's sweet perfume deeply, a traditional gesture meant to put the lotus to the nose, an encouragement to enjoy the bounty of life. Inhibitions melt away like the aromatic wax cones on their heads. The noble host, cheeks flushed with drink, stands and claps in rhythm as the musicians strike up a boisterous dance tune. "Come, friends," he calls. "Tonight we are all as young as these dancers. Let's join them." And so begins the second act of entertainment. Guests themselves forming a dancing circle. They laugh at each other's clumsy attempts to mirror the elegant performers, but no one minds the silliness. A respectable scribe twirls with surprising agility, drawing cheers. A tipsy court official attempts a daring high kick, stumbles and collapses into laughter on the cushioned floor, much to everyone's amusement. Two ladies of the court link arms and spin like schoolgirls, their peals of laughter ringing out into the warm night. This lavish banquet is a world apart from the quiet village evening, yet in many ways it is driven by the same spirit of communal enjoyment. Music and dance are not luxuries reserved for the rich. They are woven through the fabric of Egyptian life at every level. On a simpler night in a riverside tavern, for instance, a few fishermen might gather after a long day, sharing a ceramic jug of barley beer. One produces a battered lute, its single string plucked in a catchy, repeating rhythm, while another keeps time with a clap or by drumming on an upturned pottery jar. Soon they are singing a rowdy worker's song, full of cheeky humour about their overseer's bald head, and a verse or two praising Hathor's golden ale. The tavern echoes with hearty laughter as more voices join the chorus, and for a time these labourers feel like kings of their own little world. Even at the modest hearths of farmers, husbands and wives might hum a tune together as they grind grain, or a mother might sing a soft lullaby about the sky goddess, Nut, spreading her protective wings over her child. From cradle to grave, music accompanies the Egyptians. It is there in the fields as men chant to coordinate their hoe strokes, and in the temples where priests shake sacred sistra, ritual rattles, before the statues of the gods. It resounds in the workshops where craftsmen tap out rhythms as they chisel stone, and in the marching beat of soldiers training with their bows. But it is at times of celebration that music and dance truly shine. Whether a humble birthday gathering or the opulent feast of a high lord, no party is complete without melody and movement. The Egyptians, with their keen appreciation for balance and beauty, consider music a divine gift, an echo of the harmonious order Ma'at that governs the universe. They even have deities devoted to these arts, Hathor, as mentioned, and also Bez, the jovial dwarf god who dances and claps to ward off evil and bring joy to households. In painted scenes on tomb walls, we see lively depictions of banquets with guests smelling lotus flowers, musicians playing flutes and harps, and young dancers captured in mid-twirl, limbs at impossible angles in feats of flexibility. These images are not fantasies, they are records of cherished moments from real life, intended to ensure that the deceased will have just as fine a time in eternity. Even the pharaohs themselves were not immune to the allure of a captivating performance. One famous account from the Old Kingdom tells of a dancing dwarf brought from the lands far to the south as a special entertainer for the court. The young king Pepi II, upon hearing that his expedition had found such a marvel, wrote a delighted letter to his governor Harkhuf, urging him to hurry back with the dwarf. He commanded that the little dancer be kept safe and comfortable, and that no one is to allow him to fall into the Nile in transit, so eager was the boy king to see the dwarf's divine dance at the royal court. When at last this exotic performer arrived, it said that he danced in the palace before the pharaoh and his nobles, sparking uproarious laughter and amazement. The Egyptians considered dwarfs to be under the protection of the gods. Indeed, Bes, the god of home and fun, was often depicted as a dwarf, and a talented pygmy dancer from the ends of the earth was seen as a harbinger of joy and good fortune. One can imagine the scene, the little man capering nimbly to music, the child pharaoh clapping his hands in glee, and the entire court enchanted by the novelty and exuberance of the moment. For a culture that treasured both the familiar rhythms of life and the occasional wondrous surprise, this was entertainment at its finest. Back at the nobleman's pavilion, the festivities begin to mellow as midnight approaches. The dancers have taken their bows and retired, and the musicians now play a slow, dreamy tune to wind the evening down. A few guests snooze gently in their seats, spent from dancing and drink, while others sit in small groups, talking softly about the performances or complimenting the host on his excellent wine. A portly noble is still humming the refrain of the harper's song under his breath while picking at the last sweet dates on a platter. Finally, as a silvery crescent moon rises high above the palm trees, the partygoers gather their things and prepare to depart. Servants extinguish most of the torches, leaving the pavilion bathed in soft shadows and moonlight. The host, still exuberant, stands at the gate to personally thank each guest with a warm embrace or a kiss on both cheeks, a custom among close friends. "May we meet again in joy," he says sincerely to each as they step into their waiting ox-drawn chariots or donkey carts for the ride home. The night air is filled with the sound of farewell laughter and the receding jingles of harness bells. In the silence that follows, one can almost hear the garden itself sigh with contentment, as if even the statues of gods and ancestors around the pavilion smile at the memory of the merriment that took place. Tonight has been a success, another victory for life's simple happiness in the face of life's many uncertainties. Tomorrow the noble and his peers will resume the burdens of managing estates, scribes will return to their scrolls, and priests to their rituals. But tonight they have lived fully, believing as all Egyptians do that the gods delight in human joy as much as in piety. The echoes of music and laughter linger on the midnight breeze, eventually carrying across the Nile to mingle with the dreams of farmers asleep in their huts, tying together the two halves of Egypt's world, rich and poor, in that shared sacred experience of having fun. The cycle of seasons in Egypt is punctuated by festivals, bright flowers of celebration that bloom in the midst of everyday life. Every town and every god has special days when normal routines pause and the world turns upside down in joy. On these occasions, the Egyptians don their best, cast their worries aside, and partake in collective revelry that can be as solemn or as wild as the spirit of the day demands. In the great city of Thebes, capital of the new kingdom, the Opet festival transforms the streets into a grand carnival. The air quivers with anticipation from early morning. Market stalls close down, and instead vendors line the procession route, selling honey cakes and beer to revelers gathering in the sun. Families stake out a good spot along the avenue of sphinxes that connects the temple of Karnak to the temple of Luxor. Children dangle their feet from perched positions on fathers' shoulders, eyes wide and excited. Finally, a distant boom of drums announces the start of the procession. Trumpets blare and an exultant cheer rises from the crowd as the ornate bark of the god Amun emerges from Karnak's massive gates, hoisted on the shoulders of dozens of priests. The golden shrine on the bark glitters, sheltering the hidden statue of the god. Behind follow the barks of Mut and Khonsu, the other two deities of the Theban triad, equally splendid. As the holy boats move slowly forward, shaded by ostrich feather fans, the people bow their heads in respect, but also crane to catch a glimpse, tossing handfuls of flowers in their path. A troupe of musicians precedes the procession, drummers pounding a deep, steady rhythm, men blowing long straight trumpets that blare triumphantly, and women shaking sistra, filling the air with a chaotic jingle. Young girls in flowing white dresses dance alongside, twirling and scattering petals, embodying joy. Spectators join in spontaneously. An old woman ululates with all her might as Amun's bark passes, tears of devotion in her eyes. A group of youths breaks into a clapping dance at the tail of the parade, laughing as a priest winks at them from behind a censer of incense. The whole city seems to pulsate with spiritual jubilation. For the next several days, Opet in Thebes could last over 2 weeks, Thebes is in festival mode. After the grand procession to Luxor Temple, where the statues of the gods will reside for a short while, bestowing blessings, the formal religious part gives way to public celebration. The evenings see the city aglow with oil lamps as families feast outdoors. The Nile sparkles with flickering reflections of hundreds of small boats carrying merrymakers who sing and drum long into the night. On one boat, a teenage boy strums a lute and improvises a humorous song about Amun, going on holiday from Karnak to Luxor. His companions roar with laughter at the cheeky, irreverent lyrics. On the riverbanks, countless couples stroll under the palms, wearing garlands of lotus around their necks, taking the chance to flirt and celebrate love under the eye of Hathor, who surely smiles on festival romance. The sweet smell of grilling meat, a rarity in daily meals, wafts through the streets, as even poorer families splurge on a goat or some ducks to roast in honour of the gods' generosity. For many common Egyptians, these festivals are the rare times they taste rich foods or feel truly equal in merriment to their wealthier compatriots. At least during Opet, everyone feasts. Across Egypt, different festivals carry their own flavour. In farming villages, for example, when the Nile's inundation begins each year, communities host local feasts thanking Hapi, the river god, for his bounty. After making offerings at the small shrine by the riverbank, wreathing it with green reeds and fresh vegetables, villagers hold boat races and fishing contests, then drink well into the night to celebrate the promise of another fertile year. But perhaps no celebration in the land can quite match the sheer intoxicating frenzy of the festival of Bastet at Bubastis. It is late summer, and the delta town of Bubastis is positively overflowing with pilgrims. They have come by the boatload from all corners of Egypt to honour the cat goddess Bastet in her yearly festival, an event so famous that even foreigners speak of it in awe. Days before the main celebration, the Nile is jammed with traffic heading northward. An eyewitness, the Greek traveller Herodotus in fact, described how men and women crowded onto barges, bringing food, wine and musical instruments, turning the journey itself into a floating party. As each festive boat sails past riverside villages, the women on board shake rattles and play flutes, while the men and the rest of the women sing and clap their hands in time. Whenever they draw near a town, the revellers bring their boat into shore and shout good-natured mockery at the local women, who shout right back and join the dancing, or sometimes cheekily lift their skirts to the delight of all. In this uninhibited atmosphere, even decorous matronly types might wink and flash a bit of skin, a shocking gesture on any other day. But during Bastet's festival, the goddess's playful spirit takes hold and women are freed from all constraints. What ensues on the Nile is a kind of nautically born parade of mirth and mischief, a grand prelude to the real party awaiting at Bubastis. By the time these revellers arrive, Bubastis itself is in full revel mode. The city's normally modest streets are unrecognisable. Every spare wall and pole is festooned with garlands of flowers and strings of shiny copper amulets shaped like cats. Stalls sell grilled fish, pomegranates, and beer by the gallon. The devotees of Bastet believe the goddess loves music and joy, so nothing is done by half measures. From every corner comes the beat of drums, the rattle of sistra, and the chorus of flutes. Pilgrims pour through the gates of Bastet's temple, which stands on an island in the middle of the city, reachable by bridges that now teem with visitors. Inside, priests are performing the sacred rites, offering bowls of milk and burning frankincense to the lioness lady of the shrine. But outside on the temple grounds, a giant festival fair is underway. The wine flows freely. In fact, as Herodotus noted with amazement, more wine is consumed during Bastit's feast than in all the rest of the year combined. You can smell it in the air, the sharp, fruity scent of red wine splashed in celebration, and the yeasty tang of beer overflowing from clay jugs. Here a group of young men sit in a circle, challenging each other to drinking games. There a cluster of women dance with wild abandon, their hair loose and crowned with blossoms, as an old man plays a joyous tune on a lyre. Everywhere people are shouting praises to Bastet, toasting her with each cup. Joy, O Bastet! Hail to the Lady of Cats! Even those who have collapsed in giggling heaps from too much drink do so with a smile, believing that becoming drunk and merry honours the goddess today. Amid the throngs, one spectacle draws particular attention. A procession of women devotees of Bastet's snakes through the city, and these women have cast aside all ordinary propriety. They dance in nothing but short kilts, tied at the waist, their limbs bare and golden in the sunlight. As they pass through the marketplaces, they clash cymbals and beat drums, singing ecstatically to the goddess. Onlookers, men, women, and children, line the road clapping to the beat. Suddenly one of the dancing women lets out a piercing whoop and leaps onto a low wall. With a grin, she pulls up her skirt and flashes the crowd, who explode into whoops of laughter and applause. Far from offence, this is taken as a tribute to Bastet's uninhibited spirit. Mothers shield younger children's eyes with feigned disapproval, but even they are laughing. During Bastet's festival, inhibitions are shed like an old snakeskin. It is a time of catharsis and communal giddiness. As afternoon turns to night, the festival reaches its peak. Huge bonfires are lit along the riverbanks at Bubastis. The flames cast dancing shadows as musicians pick up the tempo even more. Groups of friends link arms and perform the Bastet dance, a frenzied stomping circle dance said to mimic a cat chasing its tail. Laughter peals out into the darkness. Some particularly devoted or particularly inebriated souls wade into the Nile shallows, splashing and singing to the stars. The moon rises, glowing silver, and in its light, the entire city of Bubastis heaves and sways like one living being intoxicated with delight. An observer might describe it as chaos, and indeed perhaps the spirit of Set, the trickster, has a small place even in Bastet's rites, but beneath it all is a profound sense of community and catharsis. People who were strangers in the morning now dance arm in arm as dear friends. Grudges and social distinctions melt away. A beggar shares a drink with a nobleman, and they slap each other on the back after a bawdy joke, both howling with mirth. In the temple sanctuary, the statue of Bastet sits serenely, receiving the prayers and thanks of the occasional worshipper who staggers in to light a candle. But one imagines the goddess herself is out here in the streets, in the drumbeat and the wine and the laughter, her divine spirit diffused among her people, urging them to enjoy the gift of being alive. Not all festivals in Egypt are as unrestrained as Bastet's carnival. There are more solemn feasts, laden with the perfume of religious mystery, like the Osiris Mysteries at Abydos, where priests enact the death and resurrection of Osiris in passion, plays that make spectators quietly weep and hope for renewed life. There are family-oriented celebrations, like the beautiful Feast of the Valley in Thebes, where each year the living commune with their beloved dead. On that night, families cross the Nile to the western bank carrying garlands and lanterns. They picnic at the tombs of their ancestors, laying out bread, beer and flowers at the entrances, calling out lovingly to the spirits, "Come, partake and be happy with us tonight." The necropolis hills glow with hundreds of oil lamps as dusk falls, looking from afar like a galaxy of stars blanketing the desert. Songs drift through the cool night air, tender hymns of remembrance and cheerful ditties alike, as the barriers between past and present, living and dead, dissolve in shared celebration. Children doze on their grandmothers' laps outside the tombs after too many fig cakes. Old friends, long separated, reunite each year on this night among the tombs to embrace, pour libations, and tell stories of those who have passed on. It is peaceful, poignant, and somehow joyous, an affirmation that the love of family endures across the boundary of death. When the first light of dawn pinkens the cliffs, the families gather up their empty baskets and say farewell to the ghosts with hopeful voices. Until next year. They return home with hearts comforted and oddly light, feeling that their ancestors have truly heard them and shared in the feast. Between the extremes of solemnity and wild abandon, most Egyptian festivals mix piety with plenty of party. Take the feast of Hathor at Dendera. During the day, rites of music and offering are performed in Hathor's great columned temple, priestesses shaking sistra and chanting praises to the Lady of Jubilation. But at night, the temple gates are open to the populace, and a different sort of ritual unfolds, the festival of drunkenness. This event commemorates a mythic time when humanity was saved by beer, when Ra appeased the bloodthirsty lioness Sekhmet by tricking her into drinking herself into a stupor, transforming her into the gentle Hathor. To honour that salvation, the Egyptians at Dendera drink themselves into a holy stupor. As darkness cloaks the temple courtyard, hundreds of lamps flicker from the walls and shrines. Worshippers, from high-born ladies to humble farmers who've travelled for the occasion, gather with cups of a special reddish beer, brewed strong and spiced with pomegranate juice. The priests lead a rousing hymn to Hathor. "O Golden One, pour forth your music and your love." The crowd repeats the verses, taking swig after swig of the potent brew each time Hathor's name is sung. Soon feet begin to stumble and giggles erupt unbidden. Some devotees dance unsteadily, arms thrown around each other. Others sit against the temple pillars, silly grins on their faces as they watch the sky swirl. Many are so overcome that they slump to the ground one by one, joining a patchwork of snoozing revellers across the courtyard, snoring and offering to the goddess. It is said that in this state of abandon, minds empty, bodies loose, they are closest to the divine. The priests quietly move among them, making sure none are in distress, covering a few with blankets. In the morning, as the sun's rays peek over the walls, the groggy participants awaken to the soothing sound of harps. Dates and bread are distributed to break their fast and ease their pounding heads. There is a gentle reverence in the air. Many report having had blessed dreams in the night, encounters with Hathor or visions of the world's creation. Whether true or simply hazy memories of inebriation, all agree it was the goddess's way of communing with them. They depart Dendera with hangovers and hearts full of the goddess's love, feeling cleansed of sorrow, an annual spiritual rejuvenation through revelry. As these examples show, the Egyptians' festivals were a kaleidoscope of human feeling. Some were wild street parties, others dignified processions or intimate vigils, but all were eagerly anticipated breaks from routine. They provided the average person with a taste of the extraordinary, a few days to live on a higher octave, so to speak. Work halted, societal rules relaxed, sometimes almost inverted, and people of all classes came together in common purpose, to honour life and the gods with celebration. The Egyptian calendar was crowded with such occasions. Every deity's birthday was observed. Great victories or coronations were commemorated annually. There were seasonal feasts for harvest, planting, and Nile flooding. There were national festivals and local village fairs. Through them all, the Egyptians affirmed a deep principle of their culture, that joy and sanctity were two sides of the same coin. In giving themselves over to delight, whether through music, dance, intoxication, or communal feasting, they believed they were also giving thanks to the divine forces that made joy possible. By the time the last festival of the year passes, perhaps a lesser-known one honouring Min or Khnum, the people are already looking forward to the cycle beginning anew. Life can be hard in the Nile Valley. The sun can be harsh, the work backbreaking, the spectre of sickness and death never far. But a festival on the horizon is like a beacon, a promise that the gods see your toil and will reward it with days of happiness. So when an Egyptian farmer marks his calendar for the next feast of Hathor, or an artisan counts the moons until the next Wag festival, honouring the dead, they are really counting the heartbeats that sustain their spirit through everyday trials. In each celebration they find not only fun but meaning, a reassurance that the cosmic order wants them to enjoy the sweetness of existence. And so the festivals continue year after year, era after era. Herodotus wrote with astonishment of the throngs at Bubastis. Egyptian texts themselves speak fondly of going down to the river on festival day, or singing to my lady Hathor in Jubilee. Across millennia, the notes of their flutes and the echoes of their laughter seem to still linger in those ancient temples and along the Nile's banks. One can almost imagine that on quiet nights in modern Egypt, if you listen carefully by certain ruins, you might catch the faint, distant echo of a sistrum's shake or a celebrant's song carried by the desert wind, ghostly reminders of the days when the land of the pharaohs came alive with pure fun in honour of the gods. In a grand townhouse in Memphis, a wealthy noblewoman begins her day of leisure with a ritual of beauty. The morning sun filters through mashrabiyah screens, painting patterns on the limestone floor of her boudoir. Servant girls hurry about, preparing her toilette. Steam rises from a large ceramic basin filled with warm water and scented oils of lotus and myrrh. The lady, a graceful figure in her 30s, steps into the bath and sighs as the perfumed water envelops her. This is her time. She closes her eyes, letting the worries of managing a household dissolve like the beads of fragrant oil in the water. Two maids gently scrub her skin with soft cloths dipped in natron salt, exfoliating and cleansing. Another massages her shoulders and scalp. The noblewoman hums in contentment. Bathing isn't merely about cleanliness here, it's a cherished daily indulgence. After her bath, she reclines on a cushioned chair while the servants towel her dry and anoint her body with rich incense-infused oils. In the arid Egyptian climate, skin can crack and hair can dry, but the oils keep her skin supple and glowing. She enjoys the sensation as a girl rubs the sweet almond oil into her arms and legs. It's like a mini spa treatment, centuries before the term exists. The room fills with the gentle aroma of frankincense and lilies. On a polished cedar table nearby lies her makeup palette, carved from alabaster, little pots of finely ground malachite, green and galena black, red ochre, and a mirror of bronze polished to a high sheen. With practiced hands, one maid dips a tiny ivory applicator into a paste of powdered black coal and sycamore gum, then applies it to the lady's eyelids in a dramatic line that sweeps outward. The noblewoman watches in the mirror as her eyes transform, outlined bold and almond-shaped like those of the goddess Hathor. Not only is it beautiful, it will protect her eyes from the sun's glare during the day, an ancient version of eyeliner doubling as sunblock. Next, a touch of malachite green shadow is brushed onto her lids for shimmer. Another maid takes a delicate stick and rouges the lady's lips with red ochre mixed in oil, giving them a lush bloom as if from biting into berries. Finally, a cone of perfumed wax, today scented with jasmine, is placed atop her dark wig. As it slowly melts throughout the day, it will release perfume into her hair, surrounding her with a personal cloud of fragrance. Adorning herself does not end with cosmetics. The noblewoman opens an inlaid jewellery box and fingers through her treasures, deciding what to wear. Should it be the broad faience collar necklace with beads in every colour of turquoise, lapis and carnelian, or perhaps the elegant gold pendant depicting the lioness Sekhmet, which was a gift from her husband? She smiles and chooses the faience collar. Its cheerful blues and greens match her uplifted mood this morning. Servants clasp it around her neck. It covers her chest and shoulders like a beaded cape, tinkling softly when she moves. She adds bangles of gold and ivory to her wrists and ankles, each one chiming subtly as she walks. Before she rises, she slides several rings onto her fingers. One bears her name in hieroglyphs. Another is shaped like a coiled cobra. Each piece of jewellery holds meaning: protection, status, or a connection to a deity. But beyond that, they bring her joy in their beauty and shine. As she stands, fully dressed in a freshly pleated linen gown, white as morning light, she takes a final appraising look in the bronze mirror. The face gazing back, with its painted eyes and serene smile, pleases her. She feels confident, rejuvenated, even a touch divine, for in adorning herself she has imitated the images of the goddesses. Personal grooming is an art here, one that Egyptians of means raise to sumptuous heights. The noblewoman spends the next hour or two simply enjoying the morning, nibbling on dates and pomegranates, brought by a servant, lounging on a chaise in her private garden courtyard, listening to the cooing of doves. Her pet monkey, a little green primate with a penchant for mischief, scampers up and tries to snatch one of her bracelets, thinking it a toy. She laughs, a tinkling sound not unlike her jewellery, and playfully bats the creature away, offering it a fig to keep it occupied. Many in the elite keep exotic pets: monkeys, gazelles, peacocks, even the occasional young cheetah, not only as status symbols, but because they delight in these animals' antics. Watching her monkey now somersault as it peels the fig, the lady of the house claps her hands in amusement. It will be a pleasant day. Meanwhile, in a more modest home across town, another Egyptian woman tends to her own morning routine. She is a baker's wife, and though she cannot afford the luxury of long baths and personal attendance, she too relishes the little moments of self-care. After hauling water from the well for her family, she takes a spare pitcher and pours some over herself in their enclosed courtyard, shivering slightly as the cool water washes away the sweat of the already warm morning. She rubs her skin briskly with a scrap of linen. Soap is expensive, but a bit of natron salt from the kitchen helps scour away dirt. Feeling refreshed, she dries off and reaches for her coal pot. Using a tiny wooden stick, she applies the familiar black paint to her eyelids. In the reflective surface of a simple copper mirror, her tired eyes suddenly look larger, more awake. She smiles. The baker's wife then takes a pinch of crushed rosemary and rubs it behind her ears, a homemade touch of perfume to ward off any sour, doughy smells that cling after a night of baking. She owns a single perfume cone, acquired last festival. She saves it for special days. Today she settles for a dab of scented oil from a clay vial, patting it onto her neck. Over her simple linen dress she ties a colourful woven belt that she herself embroidered with bright blue patterns, and from a wooden peg on the wall she lifts her prize piece of jewellery, a necklace of roughly cut turquoise blue faience beads with a little copper cat amulet dangling at the centre. It's not gold, but to her it's beautiful. The amulet of Bastet makes her feel protected and feminine. As she dons it, she feels a small lift in her heart, a moment of pride and happiness that she too can present her best self to the world. Even the working classes indulge in grooming when they can. At the river earlier dawn, a group of field hands took turns dunking in the shallows to wash off the mud of the fields, laughing and splashing like children. They scraped their bodies with coarse cloths, cleaning off sweat then dried in the rising sun. One young farmhand carefully shaved his face with a bronze razor. It's a festival day later, and he wants to look tidy. His friend braids a fresh reed band to wear as a headband, tucking in a white lotus he picked by the water's edge. Another uses a little leftover coal borrowed from his sister to line his eyes, chuckling as his comrades tease him, but secretly they all agree it makes his eyes stand out handsomely. Clean, groomed and joking with each other, they head off to work feeling more human, more alive. What becomes clear is that personal appearance is a source of enjoyment and expression at every level of Egyptian society. In a world without mirrors on every wall, catching one's reflection in a still pool or a polished piece of metal is a small thrill. Am I as radiant as I feel, they wonder. For the noblewoman, looking exquisite is part of her social duty and personal delight. For the commoner, a bit of beauty is a treat snatched from a life of labour. Both find comfort and confidence in their self-adornment. The cosmetics not only beautify, but often carry protective or medicinal qualities. The kohl guards against eye infections and sun glare. The henna on fingertips cools and hardens nails. So one can feel both safer and more alluring at once. Egyptian men too appreciate the art of presentation. Most keep their hair cropped short or their heads shaved, a practical choice in the heat and against lice. But many own wigs for special occasions, perhaps not human hair like the wealthy, but woven of wool or palm fibre. A young scribe getting ready for a New Year's banquet might carefully perfume his wig with a bit of incense smoke, slip into a freshly laundered linen tunic, and place a cone of scented fat on top, just as the highborn do, so that as he dances later the melting aroma will mark him as a gentleman of refinement. He may even dust a little powdered ochre on his cheeks to give himself a healthy flush and outline his eyes with kohl to appear more distinguished. Checking his look in a brass mirror, he stands a little taller, ready to mingle with confidence, feeling his best self. Beyond the individual, grooming and fashion also have a communal aspect. Friends and family often help each other. Mothers paint their daughters' eyes, wives trim their husbands' hair. In open-air barbershops along city streets, men sit on stools having their heads shaved and beards trimmed by professionals who chat and gossip, creating a social hub as much as a service. Women gather to wash clothes in the river and may end up comparing hairstyles or trading homemade cosmetics, like a particularly nice batch of scented pomade or a new mixture of clay and ochre that works well as rouge. These are moments of social bonding, small pleasures shared in the midst of chores. And of course, fashion in Egypt is not complete without mention of clothing, however simple it may seem. The styles are relatively unchanging, linens wrapped and draped in clever ways, from the basic kilt of a labourer to the pleated gowns of nobility. But within that sameness lies room for creative expression. Wealthier folks dye their linens in saffron yellows, indigo blues or madder reds for festive attire, or weave patterns of geometric designs at the edges. Even the poor sometimes tie-dye a scrap of cloth or add a fringe to personalise their attire. Footwear, when worn, ranges from plain woven reed sandals to those of fine leather tooled with patterns, a bit of swagger in each step. And nothing stops an Egyptian from carrying themselves like royalty if they feel good. there is an oft-carved scene of an elegantly dressed noblewoman giving a perfumed lotus to her maid, but likewise one can imagine a humble girl tucking a simple flower in her hair and walking with the same grace down a village lane. In these small daily rituals, the application of makeup, the choosing of an accessory, the bathing of one's dusty body, the ancient Egyptians find a sense of control and joy. It is a world where fate and gods loom large, but one's own self is a canvas that can be adorned and celebrated. The mirror, be it bronze or just a clear puddle, offers a moment of dialogue with oneself. You are alive, you are here, and you are beautiful in the eyes of the gods. Every morning that this message is affirmed through the act of grooming is, in its own way, a celebration of life. By midday, our Memphis noblewoman has moved from her boudoir to her garden pavilion, feeling fresh and lovely. She picks up a lute and idly strums a few notes. Yes, she practices music too as a pastime, while her monkey chatters along. Across town, the baker's wife, having finished her chores, sits with neighbours under a shade tree, braiding her friend's hair in an intricate pattern, while another woman tells a funny story. They chew on mint leaves, nature's breath freshener, and occasionally compliment each other's handiwork. "Those braids make you look like a queen, Henut." In moments like these, one sees clearly that leisure is not only in grand festivals or games, but also in the gentle acts of self-care and camaraderie. In caring for their bodies and enjoying adornment, the ancient Egyptians are saying yes to life each day, affirming that to live is not just to toil and pray, but also to delight in one's own existence, to feel clean, whole, and pleasing, as if part of the beautiful order of the world. As we draw the threads of this journey together, a picture emerges of a culture where joy was not a mere diversion from life, it was an integral part of life's meaning. The ancient Egyptians lived in a world of stark dualities, fertile black earth and barren desert, day and night, order and chaos, life and death. Central to their worldview was the principle of Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe. We often think of Ma'at in terms of justice, truth, and duty, but it also encompassed a balance in one's own spirit. To live in accordance with Ma'at was to live a balanced life, one that certainly involved piety and hard work, but equally allowed for laughter, love, and play. They saw no contradiction between the sacred and the silly. In fact, they intertwined them. A hymn to Amun could be sung earnestly in the morning, and by evening that same devotee might be singing a drinking song with friends, and both, in their proper time, honoured the gods. It was the Egyptians who famously said, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die," long before similar words were uttered in Rome or anywhere else. In the harper's song inscribed on tomb walls, a blind bard advises, "Follow your heart as long as you live, heap up your joys, let your heart not sink, make holiday, do not weary of it. Lo, none is allowed to take his goods with him, lo, none who departs comes back again." These were not the words of a rogue hedonist, but of respected sages, encouraging people to embrace life's pleasures because tomorrow is never guaranteed. The Egyptians valued life so greatly that they wished it to continue forever, and in their vision of eternity, the best of life's delights would carry on. They spent their lives preparing for death, yes, but just as fervently they spent their days celebrating being alive. If one wanders through an Egyptian tomb or temple today, one might be struck by how many scenes show people at leisure. Nobles feasting, couples smelling lotus blossoms, people playing music and dancing, farmers relaxing under shade trees with jugs of beer. These are not trivial vignettes. They were central to how the Egyptians conceived of paradise. One's heaven was essentially the continuation of one's happiest moments on earth. They placed board games, musical instruments, cosmetics, and toys in their tombs so that the departed could enjoy themselves in the afterlife just as they had in life. An ancient inscription in a tomb in Thebes reads, "May I walk every day unceasingly on the banks of the Nile, my soul at peace, seeing fish in the stream and fowl in the marsh, and may I dance to the harp in the land of eternity." That heartfelt wish sums it up. For the Egyptians, fun and fulfillment were not separate from the sacred, but a pathway to it. On any given day in ancient Egypt, you might find a farmer humming a tune as he guides his oxen, looking forward to a beer with comrades at sundown. You might see a priestess of Hathor teaching young girls a graceful new dance for the next festival. Perhaps you'd spy a group of boys in a village square, knucklebones clattering in a dice game as they erupt into cheers whenever someone wins, while nearby a group of girls giggle over a game of keep away with a ball of stitched leather. Under a palm, an old couple share a joke and a slice of melon, having seen enough of life to know that these small moments are precious. And somewhere by the river's edge, a scribe on a break sketches a funny caricature of his supervisor in the sand to amuse his peers. And indeed, archaeologists have uncovered whimsical papyri, where animals mimic humans, like mice driving chariots and cats leading cattle, the ancient equivalent of cartoons, before the drawing is washed away by the next flood. Time may separate us from those days by the Nile, but the experience of joy unites us. In their leisure, the Egyptians revealed a profound optimism. For all the certainty of death that their monuments proclaim, their daily actions whisper an unspoken philosophy of life, that life is fundamentally good, that the world, in spite of its dangers, is a place to be enjoyed, and that to delight in existence is to honour the Creator. They had a term, wersha, which meant to recreate or rejuvenate oneself. It's akin to what we call recreation. Tellingly, it carries the nuance of renewal. They understood that after toil, one's spirit needed refreshment. Fun wasn't frivolous, it was restorative, a taste of the eternal bliss to come, and a vital counterweight to life's hardships. It kept the human heart light and the community bound together. Even the gods in Egyptian myth partake in joy. Hathor dances and plays music to cheer a sun god in despair. Thoth wins a gamble with the moon to add 5 extra days, and thus more birthdays and festivals to the calendar. At the dawn of creation, the lotus flower opens with a baby sun god, inside laughing, bringing light to the world. To the Egyptians, laughter was literally the first sound the universe heard. Even their art and literature show a playful irreverence alongside deep piety. Scribes sometimes doodled animals acting like humans, cats herding geese, mice driving chariots, poking fun at the social order in private little ways. One clay ostracon, a pottery fragment, shows a lion and an antelope playing a board game. Did the Egyptians really think animals played senet? Of course not, it was a joke, an ancient cartoon with perhaps a witty caption now lost. These glimpses tell us that they could laugh at themselves and their world, and that humour was another thread woven into daily life's tapestry. Now our journey through this sun-dappled world of Egyptian leisure comes to an end. The shadows lengthen by the Nile, and one by one our new friends slip from view. The children head home, tired from swimming and wrestling. The musicians pack up their lyres and drums. The storyteller falls silent, his voice spent. The last revellers at the festival stagger contentedly to their beds as the embers of bonfires glow in the dark. In the great distance, the pyramids of Giza stand against the orange dusk, immense and eternal. the tombs of kings casting long shadows across the sands. But within those shadows there is not gloom, there is life. We have heard it in laughter and music, seen it in dance and play. The ancient Egyptians lived in the shadow of eternity, building monuments to last forever, yet they filled each day with the brightness of being alive. They knew, perhaps better than most, that every moment of happiness is sacred. As the stars emerge over the desert, imagine an Egyptian family on their rooftop enjoying the cool night air after a long day. Perhaps they are finishing a friendly game of senet by lamplight, or sharing a bowl of figs while mother sings a gentle lullaby. They look up at the same constellations we see today, Orion, which they knew as Osiris, and Sirius, the star of Isis. In that cosmic connection across thousands of years, we can feel a kinship. They laughed under these stars, they loved under these stars, they hoped under these stars. Time may separate us, but the human heart remains much the same. The tale of ancient Egyptian fun is more than a catalogue of pastimes. It is a celebration of the spirit that connects us all. It is a reminder that even in a civilization so preoccupied with death, it was the celebration of life itself that truly mattered. Their games, their music, their festivals, these were expressions of gratitude for existence. They invite us to hear the echo of a harp strumming in a distant tavern, to see the flicker of festival fires on the Nile, and to feel the same stirring in our souls that made an Egyptian remark some 3,000 years ago. True, one cannot escape death, but one can live each day so that when it comes, one has no regrets. In the end, to be fully alive, to play, to laugh, to dance with joy even in the shadow of the pyramids, is to touch the eternal.